נאי 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 צדיק כתמר אפרח כארז בלבנון יסגן צדיק כתמר אפרח כארז בלבנון יסגן שתולים בבית השם בחצרות אלוקינו יפריחו עוד ינובון בזבע שנים ורעננים יהיו להגיד כי ישר השם צורי ולא עוולה תבוא נאי 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 na 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 Hashem Melech Hashem Malach Hashem Imloch Leolam Va'ed Hashem Melech Hashem Malach Hashem Imloch Leolam Va'ed Vehaya Hashem Lemelech Al kol haaretz ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד אוי נאי 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 השם מלך השם מלך השם ימלוך לעולם ועד השם מלך השם מלך השם ימלוך לעולם ועד והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ היום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד אוי והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד אוי נאי 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 אוי נאי 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 Nay na 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 nay 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 והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד. והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד. נאי 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 נאי
Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And welcome to this week's World Alliance of Qara'im Torah study.
אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם.
Okay, so let's turn off the music here.
שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגלי.
Okay, so welcome to the Torah study. We are going to do a regular Torah study today. We're starting in Sefer Bereshit, in the book of Genesis. Last week we completed the book of Deuteronomy, and now we go back to the beginning, to the book of Genesis. So I guess maybe that is the message that week in regards to what happened in Israel. Of course, we all know by now what happened in Israel. We're all following what happened in Israel. Some of us are glued to the news from morning until night regarding what happened in Israel. But every death is followed by a rebirth. Just as when we come to the end of Deuteronomy, we start right again studying at the beginning the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 1 we'll be studying today. And we can take this lesson. We cannot bring back the people that died, or, well, the ones who are injured, I guess we can. They're not gone yet. And the ones who are kidnapped, I guess, are not gone yet. But we can't bring back those who died. All we could do is renew the cycle of life. And even if individuals die, as horrible as it is, the nation of Israel goes on. Am Yisrael Chai. The nation of Israel continues to grow and continues to rejuvenate itself and continues to regenerate. The only thing we can do at this point is learn the lessons from what happened. I know 100% for sure that this sadly was a big wake-up call in Israel. Many people who didn't want to see the truth before are now beginning to see the truth. Is this going to percolate its way all the way up to the echelons of power, the top Western aligned, liberal, Western talking, Western dressing, American worshiping leaders of Israel? That remains to be seen. If nothing else, then some of them are going to do it out of self-preservation, because if they don't take revenge, harsh revenge on the Arabs for what happened last week, then at the very least they're going to be thrown out of office. At the very most, if anything further happens like this, then it's very possible that the people of Israel are going to say we've had enough, and they'll just storm the Knesset and they'll drag him out and lynch him. I really think that's an actual possibility if they don't take harsh revenge on the Arabs. So they know that their asses are on the line. And so for that very reason, not because they've really changed their attitudes, but because they know that their very future hangs in the balance, at the very least their political future hangs in the balance, they're going to give a pretty harsh response, I guess. But then again, that doesn't bring back the people who were killed, who were murdered, the little babies that were decapitated, burnt, entire families that were wiped out. A real old style pogrom. I guess we can't say a Holocaust because it wasn't on the scale of a Holocaust, but a pogrom, just like in the old days. That has happened to us, sadly, throughout our history, and that the land of Israel was meant to be a refuge from. However, as we realize, living in the land of Israel without the Torah of Israel and without Yahweh, the God of Israel, is ultimately devoid of meaning. The only reason that we were given the land of Israel in the first place was to set up a model nation to basically live together with Yahweh. Remember, in the conception in the Torah, Yahweh literally lives among us. Let me just get rid of this for a second. Literally lives among us in Jerusalem, in the temple, in the inner sanctum of the temple, on the ark cover between the cherubim. That's where he lives. As I've said many times throughout the Torah studies, that is his physical address in this world. No, he doesn't have a physical form. His kavod, his glory, somehow exists between the cherubim on the ark cover. But he literally lives among us in this world, and his address is, 1 Temple Mount Drive, Jerusalem, Israel, 99035, or whatever it is. Okay? So that's the purpose that we were brought into the land of Israel. That's the purpose that we were taken out of Egypt. That was the fulfillment of the covenant and of the promise that was given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob so many generations before Israel was ever taken out of Egypt and brought to Mount Sinai to speak word for word or face to face with God. So if we don't realize that and recognize that, then our existence in the land of Israel sadly becomes not that much different. I won't say it's exactly the same, because there really is in Israel a lot of Jewish awareness, a lot of Jewish identity, a lot of Jewish pride, but it doesn't become that different from our existence in Poland or our existence in Tunisia or wherever, or Spain or whatever other places, wherever other places Jews were. So I hope that maybe this will be that kind of wake-up call. This will be a wake-up call for the nation of Israel, that it's not enough just to return to the land of Israel. This is the results of just returning to the land of Israel. We can still have pogroms. We can still have horrible things happen to us, just as we did in the old country, but that we realize that more needs to be done, that we need to return to Yahweh, and we need to return to Torah. We need to proclaim his name, Yahweh. We need to call out to him. We need to pray to him. We need to spread his name, because only by calling out his name do we get his protection, and do we get his assistance, and do we show that he is our God and we are his people. So that's perhaps the lesson that is the lesson that will ultimately have to be taken from this event that happened last week. Whether that lesson is going to be taken or not, I don't know. Because I think, again, sadly, the situation we have in Israel are that Israel is basically divided into two camps, which is, as I said, I gave the example, I guess, last week of two city-states, one called Tel Aviv, that worships the God of America, McDonald's and Coca-Cola. And literally, if you drive around Tel Aviv, you can literally see banners and flags of McDonald's and Coca-Cola and the United States flag. So they literally worship these as their gods. If Tel Aviv were hilly, then I'm sure they'd set up high places to these false gods. And then if you go to Jerusalem, the other city-state that's in opposition to Tel Aviv, it worships the God of the Talmud and Rashi and the Shulchan Aruch and all of this rabbinical Judaism nonsense. So the two city-states are fighting against each other, and in the meantime, our enemies are fighting against us, against this divided nation that's fighting against each other. So the only solution ultimately is the return to the true Torah, the return to the true Tanakh, the return to Karaitism or Tanach-only Torah, or whatever you want to call it. And I sadly, what happened this past week or last Shabbat. It was exactly one Shabbat ago. In fact, while we were doing the Torah study, we were following the news from Israel. Sadly, this is the price that will have had to be paid to get Israel to the next stage, because Israel as a nation will get there sooner or later. The question is just how many lives are going to be lost in the meantime, how stubborn the nation is going to be, and how many lessons we have to learn before we get there. So we all have to do our part, I think, at this point, to spread the word of Tanakh, spread the word of Torah. The people of Israel are ripe for it. They are so sick and tired of the Western baloney, and they're so sick and tired of the rabbinical Judaism baloney, that they're really ripe for true Torah, true Tanakh, whatever that means. I would say as Karaites, we're not prophets. I'm not a prophet. We just do our best to try to understand and recreate that form of Judaism, what we believe is a more authentic form of Judaism. And even if some of our understandings of the Torah are not correct in the end, it doesn't matter, because it's the attitude, it's the direction, it's the point that we're trying to get across, which is to get rid of all of the foreign philosophies, whether it's the gods, the Western gods of Tel Aviv, of America, McDonald's and Burger King, and not Burger King. No, that's just a kind of a demigod. That's like the son of God. That would be like the Jesus of Tel Aviv. But McDonald's, Coca-Cola, and America, or the false gods flying in Jerusalem, the flags of which are flying in Jerusalem, of the Talmud, the Shulchan Aruch, and Rashi. Then either way, what the nation of Israel needs is a return to its land, to its original language, to its God Yahweh, its Elohim Yahweh, and to the original Torah as much as possible. And sadly, what happened last week is just part of that process. So that doesn't mean in any way, shape, or form that I'm happy that happened. I'm devastated. I mean, I can't even look at the pictures and the videos anymore. But the most we could do at this point is move on. And well, I don't know yet if we're ready to move on, but at some point move on and take the lessons that are learned and try to, in the name of those who were killed, the innocent children, old people, babies that were burned, killed, raped, God knows what, try to make a better future for those of us who remain, and make that future in the land of Israel with Yahweh, the God of Israel, and with the true Torah of Israel. So that's my message. I do see in Israel a significant waking up, but sadly the waking up seems to still be political. It's more like, okay, we have to get rid of this, the leftist attitude of sharing the land with the Arabs, of being nice to them, of trying to make peace with them. Of course, that's all true. That goes without saying. Anyone with half a brain in his head, knows that and knew that decades ago. And those who didn't are now waking up to that. That goes without saying, but it goes deeper than that. And again, our existence in Israel really has no meaning if it's not with Yahweh, the God of Israel, if it's not with the true Torah of Israel, if it's not in the land of Israel that is our land, devoid of all of those who are not part of the nation of Israel. So that's kind of my message for the day. We saw all the horrible things, that happened last week, and all we could do at this point is hope that it serves as a wake-up call, so that more and more people will, for the remaining of us in the nation of Israel, that will get us to the next stage in the redemption, in our return to Yahweh and Yahweh's return to us. And notice I don't mention anything about Mashiach and that kind of stuff. Again, I feel that in rabbinical Judaism, this whole idea of Messiah and Mashiach, this is also a form of idol worship. It's very nice that the house of David will be restored. It's very nice that Yahweh will, as are predicted in the prophecies, will restore the house of David and will put a king over us who is loyal to him and who is loyal to his commandments. But we don't wait for a human being to return to us. We wait for Yahweh to return to us, and we wait for us to return to Yahweh. And if that also means in his return to us that he's going to put a righteous king and a righteous judge over us, then that's wonderful. then we of course want that. But the focus should not be that. The focus should be Yahweh, not the Messiah. And unfortunately, in rabbinical Judaism, it's too much focus on the Messiah, Mashiach, Mashiach, Mashiach. This is, of course, I don't know if they got it from Christianity or Christianity got it from them, but of course, this is similar to Christianity, where they again focus on a human being rather than on God, on Yahweh. And so I don't think as Karaites, as Tanach-only Jews, we should make that mistake. Our focus should not be on Mashiach. It should be on the return of Yahweh to the people of Israel and our return to him, because that's really what the prophecies speak about. And what we can do is, I think it's more important than ever to teach people that his name is not Adonai, his name is not Hashem, his name is not Adokai and Elohim and Hakem and Yud Ke Vav Ke and all of this kind of stuff. I think it's important now, if each person were to take upon themselves a personal mission of spreading the actual name of God, the actual name of Yahweh, whether it turns out to be Yahweh or Yihweh or Yehovah, it honestly doesn't matter. It's all close enough. The point is that it's Yud, Hey, Wow, Hey. We know that. And each of us should take it upon ourselves to spread that name and to tell people to pray to that name, to cry out to that name, to shout out that name, and to spread the word about the name to the rest of the nation and to the rest of the world. Because only when we're proclaiming the name, only when we're saying that that is our God, we've actually shied away from saying the name of our own God. So in a sense, we don't even have a God. We don't have a God named Adonai or Elohim or Hashem. That's not the name of our God. The name of our God is Yahweh. And only when the nation of Israel proclaims that name and spreads the word about the name will that lead to the redemption. So that's kind of my introductory message for the day. So this is heretical talk. Okay, so it's heretical talk. That's the way it is. I'm a heretic, I guess. So before we dig into the Torah study today, I wanted to open the microphones up to anyone who wants to express their own ideas, give their own opinion about what's going on in Israel, or just their thoughts. If anybody wants to do that, then now is a good time. And you could do it by coming onto the Streamyard link. I guess I could post it here for those who don't know it. And if not, then we're going to go on and we will continue studying the Torah. So there it is. Okay. If anyone wants to come on and give their thoughts about what's going on in Israel, about the situation in general, please feel free to. In the meantime, I guess we'll go on and we will study Torah. And we're back at the beginning. We're back at Bereshit. It feels like we were just studying Bereshit, just a week ago, but we weren't. It was actually a year ago. And so we restart the cycle. We renew, the birth, and this renewal of birth represents the renewal of the nation of Israel, which has a promise, the only nation that has a promise from the creator of heaven and earth, from Yahweh, the creator of the universe, that will be an eternal nation that will never cease to exist, is Israel. All of the other nations, they have their birth date, they grow up, they reach their maximum strength, then they start getting old, then they start withering away, and then eventually they die. That's the pattern of every other single nation in the world, with no exceptions. The only exception to that is Israel, is the nation of Israel. So with that, we'll restart the Torah, and if anyone wants to come on and give their opinion or give their insight into what's going on, please let me know. Okay, let me hide this. All right, so Bereshit. So let me bring it up. And I have a unique take on Bereshit, which I will talk about in a second. I've spoken about it in previous years, but maybe now we'll go into it a little bit more. Let me just stop this screen. Let me bring up the Torah window. Torah. And there we go. Okay, and just give me 1 second while I grab some water. This is my favorite. It's sparkling water. That's what I drink all day long, pretty much. Okay. And let's dig in. So we are in the beginning, Bereshit. So we're all aware of this. Anyone who knows the Bible, and most people who don't know the Bible, know this first verse, right? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Or is that really what it says? So a lot of the more Jewish-oriented translations will not translate it that way, and we'll see that in a second. So the more Jewish-oriented translations will actually translate it as in the beginning, or when God began to create the heaven and the earth. And there's a big difference between in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and when God began to create the heaven and the earth. So we can already see the difference between the two, right? In the beginning. So that already says that there was kind of a beginning time when God created the heaven and the earth, or that the focus is on that time rather than on God. And saying instead, when God began to create the heaven and the earth, kind of implies the eternity of Yahweh. It implies the focus on Yahweh. It implies the focus on God rather than the focus on, let's say, the creation. But I think it does more than that. And I will point out what I think it does. But let's just see if we can get a commentary on this very, very important verse. Just give me a second here to bring all this up. So I'm going to do a couple of things here. So we can do our Robert Alter, who's our usual go-to. Okay, oops, there we go. Oops. All right, do it that way. 1, 1, 5. So if you notice that Robert Alter already translates it as when God began to create heaven and earth. So that is, again, a more typical Jewish understanding of these verses. Bereshit bara. So if that's the case, now it is vowelized here as bara, he created. But I'm not 100% sure that that's right. It might really be more like, maybe move more like Bereshit bara with a shva here, or maybe even Bereshit bero, like livro, in the beginning of God's creation, or when God began creating the heaven and the earth. But let's see what commentary we can get here. So he actually doesn't even have a comment on Genesis 1:1. All right, let's look at Everett Fox. So Everett Fox also is Jewish oriented and Jewish at the beginning of God's creating of the heavens and the earth. Okay, so we don't see here anything as at or in the beginning. If we go to our more standard translations, let me do that this way. I think Parallel does it. And so Phil says, missed my chance. Mike not available. Now we know there is good and there is evil. The forces opposing Israel, evil. Is that plain? That's simple. I choose Israel. Right. Beautiful. Yes, I mean, one of the things that is certainly clear about this event is that it forces people to choose sides. There is no one or very few people sitting on the fence here. They either side with Israel or they side against Israel with the, we'll call them the Gazans or the Palestinians or whatever you want to call them. And you can see very clearly what is in a person's heart by which side they choose, right? This has definitely been a moment of clarity, and as a very good friend of mine has pointed out, she's learned who her real friends are and who are not her real friends through this event. So okay, so if we look at various translations here, so the NIV, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And we're going to get that for most of the standard Christian translations. In the beginning, in the beginning, in the beginning, in the beginning. King James Bible, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And then if we go down to some of the less common translations, let's see what we can get. So these are all Christian translations. So let's see here. Additional translations. Let's try that. Modern translations, classic translations. So some of these more literal translations, right? Young's literal translation, in the beginning of God's preparing the heaven and the earth. JPS, this is the Jewish Publication Society. So it actually goes with, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Okay. So, but again, I think that what it really means here, or what it's really focusing on here, is Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim wa et haaretz. In God's, or when God began to create the heaven and the earth. So what does that mean? Began to create the heaven and the earth. I think, and I've mentioned this in previous years, I think there's a huge misunderstanding here. And that misunderstanding is that the typical understanding of these verses is that this is the creation of the universe. In other words, the Big Bang. And then when we speak about let there be light in the following verses, this means this primordial light that was created out of God, out of nothingness at the creation of the universe. But I think this is incorrect. This is not at all what Genesis 1 is talking about. It's not starting from the creation of the universe. It's starting from the point, and this is really important, I think, and I think most people completely miss this. It's the focus is not the universe. This is not a cosmological statement. This is starting, the book of Genesis actually starts at the point of when the earth already exists and is in some kind of primordial state. And I will show proof of this in just a second. So whenever we talk about the heavens and the earth, right, in the beginning, or when God began to create the heavens and the earth, the Shemayim always means the sky, and Haaretz always means the land or the dry land. So a better way to understand this verse would actually be when God began to create the sky and the solid earth or the dry earth. And that gives a completely different perspective on what's going on here. This is long after, if we believe in the Big Bang and in the standard cosmology, which I personally do believe in. My background is math and science. Long before I even got into Torah, when I was just growing up as a kind of standard suburban New York Jewish kid, my whole life was, well, not my whole life, but a lot of it was focused on math and science. Both of my parents have a math and science background. My father, now retired, was a professor of mechanical engineering at a large university in New York. My mother has her PhD in statistics and educational testing. So I grew up in a very science-oriented family. And so I actually believe and have faith in a lot of modern science. It may turn out that some of it is wrong, but I think overall, I think I think modern science has discovered a lot of truths. Unfortunately, they disconnect those truths from Yahweh, from the fact that Yahweh is behind all of this. Right? What is it called again? The not guided intelligence, but I forgot what it's called. Some people attribute intelligence to all of this, and they're more, God oriented, even if they don't say explicitly that it's God. But I don't think that what modern science has revealed is false. It's just that they don't attribute it. Many scientists don't attribute it to Yahweh. At any rate, the point is that this is not where Genesis 1:1 starts. It doesn't start by saying, "Oh, in the beginning there was a big bang, and the universe came into existence out of nothing, and then energy was created, and the energy, as the universe expanded, that energy congealed into matter, and so on and so forth." That's not what it's saying here at all. And hold on a second. Added from outside because he's crying. Joshi boy, come here. Come. Come on. Come. There's some food. Go eat. All right, but really, what we have to understand, I think, is that the Torah is not universe focused. We don't even really hear about the universe within the Torah. Yes, look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. God says to Abraham in Genesis 15, but there's no focus on exploring other parts of the universe, cosmology, none of that stuff. The focus is all on our existence on this earth. And that's where Genesis 1:1 starts. So really what this is saying, I think a better translation, rather than in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, would be when God began to form the sky and the dry ground. That's really what its focus is. The focus is the earth. And I claim that when Genesis 1:1 or Genesis 1:1 is speaking about a time long after the Big Bang, long after the creation of the universe, and long after the creation of the earth. It's just that the earth, the time that he's speaking about is when the earth is in its primordial form. It's covered with water. Dry land has not yet shown or is not yet poked out from the water. There's the sun and the moon are not visible because there's a heavy cloud cover. And again, if we look back into the scientific understanding of primordial Earth, I don't remember all the details, but I think there was like an ammonia atmosphere, and then it became an oxygen atmosphere, and God knows what. But certainly, standard science does say that there was a time when the Earth was completely covered with water, and when the atmosphere was so thick that you could not see past it to the sun, the moon, and the stars. And that's where Genesis 1:1, in my strong opinion, starts. So let's get rid of this idea once and for all, this incorrect idea, in my opinion, that Genesis 1:1 is some kind of grand cosmological statement, but really it's picking it up after the creation of the earth. I think what do they say? The earth was created 4.8 billion years ago or something like that. Let's say the age of the earth is 5 billion years. Shoham, off the table. Shoham. That cat. Let's say it's 5 billion years ago. Then this is picking it up a billion years after that, 4 billion years ago, after the earth has already been formed, but it's in some kind of primordial state. Shoham. Joshi. Off the table. You have to get off the table. I'm going to throw you out. Come here, you. Come on. Shoham. Get over here. Get over here. You want to learn some Torah for cats? Huh? Come here, you. Come here, you. We found this cutie a couple of months ago, and he's now turning into a big cat. Okay, so and my proof of this is verse 2. So let's translate this. Wa'aretz haytha tohu wa vohu v'hoshech al pnei tehom v'ruach Elohim mirahefet al pnei hamayim. So verse 2 says, the earth was, and tohu vavohu is usually translated as void and unformed. So we'll just go with that for now. give it my opinion in a second as to what it really means. But void and unformed, and darkness was on the face of the deep or the depths. And either the wind or the spirit of God hovered upon the face of the water. Okay, well, isn't that interesting? So first of all, what I always like to point out, the earth was void and unformed. What people always ignore in this verse is it says the earth was. This is not talking about a point in time before the earth was created. This is talking about a point in time after the earth is already created and it's in its primordial state. And the proof is the earth was. If this were some kind of statement, cosmological statement about the Big Bang, then it wouldn't even say the earth existed yet. It would say something like the earth was then formed, or then the earth, congealed out of the surrounding matter or something like that. It doesn't say that at all. It says the earth was void and unformed. And what does that mean? We're going to find out what that means. It means it wasn't in its current format. It was in its current form. It was in some kind of primordial state where the entire surface was covered with water and where the atmosphere was so thick that you couldn't see past it. That's what we're talking about here, again, in my strong opinion, in Genesis 2. What cosmology do you believe? The earth is fixed and unmovable, or NASA artificial calculations? I believe in NASA artificial calculations. No, I do not believe. I am not a flat earther, and I do not believe the earth is fixed or any of that baloney. I believe in standard cosmology for the most part, until something better is proved. Okay. No, the earth is definitely not stationary. That's ridiculous. Okay, the earth was void and unformed. So what it really means, so we see tohu vavohu, this is a rhyme. Tohu vavohu. Okay? So it's this phrase, tohu vavohu, it doesn't really mean anything per se. The word tohu appears a bunch of other places in the Tanakh. And we could look at one of them. I think the word vohu, if I'm not mistaken, does not appear anywhere else, but let's see. Okay, a couple of other places. Well, it appears as tohu vavohu. But it never appears alone. So tohu appears alone, but really tohu doesn't really appear alone, because tohu, when it appears, is really short for tohu vavohu. So it's kind of a rhyming phrase. The first thing we could see is that it's a rhyming phrase, right? Tohu vavohu. And so it's expressing something that is, I don't know, again, poetic. Whenever we see these kinds of rhymes, we know that we're talking about some kind of poetry or some kind of poetic way of expressing something. Okay, let's see how Robert Alter deals with that one. Welter and waste, that's the way he translates it. So the Hebrew tohu vohu occurs only here and in two later biblical texts that are clearly alluding to this one, for sure. The second word of the pair looks like a nonce term coined to rhyme with the first and to reinforce it, right? So he's saying basically what we just said. Nonce means like a non-existence. It doesn't mean nonsense. A non-existent term that is just made to rhyme with the first one. In effect, I've tried to approximate in English by alliteration. Tohu itself means emptiness or futility, and in some contexts is associated with the trackless vacancy of the desert. In fact, we just saw this word recently in the end of Deuteronomy. So, so he's basically saying what we just said, that tohu vavohu, that the vavohu part is, again, this poetic way of enhancing the original word tohu, which actually does have some meaning. It would be like saying in English, I don't know, the the coin box is empty wempty, right? It's it's a poetic way of saying, wow, that thing is like totally empty, okay? Or of emphasizing it or of drawing attention to it, or I don't know. Yeah, we'll go with that. The coin box is empty wempty. That works perfectly. That's essentially what the Torah is doing here. It's taking this word tohu, which means devoid, or which means, well, let's see what it means, and then adding on this vohu part to poetically enhance it, to poetically draw attention to it. But again, the main part here is ha'aretz hayta. The earth was. It doesn't say the earth wasn't. It's not talking about before the earth was created. Already in Genesis 2, and by extension, in Genesis 1, the earth already existed. Because this doesn't mean in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. No, this means when God began to form, and form, bara, doesn't mean form out of nothing. It means to form into its current form. So these statements here, Genesis 1 and 2, would best be understood as when the earth was in its primordial format, when the earth was covered with, when the surface was completely covered with water, when the atmosphere was so thick that you couldn't see out of it to see the sun, the moon, and the stars. That there was choshech al panei tehom, there was darkness on the face of the depths. And by the way, the word tehom always implies deep waters. This should really be translated, it's usually translated as depths, but tehom, I can't think of any place where it doesn't apply to waters. We can see that also. We have a little bit of time. So darkness was upon the face of the deep waters. Ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. And the spirit, or we could even make a case, a wind, maybe there was some kind of wind, but we'll go with spirit of Yahweh, hovered or wafted across the face of the water. So we're talking about an earth whose surface is covered with water. And we're talking about, as we'll see, a sky, an atmosphere so thick that you can't see out of it. So what are we talking about? Not 14 billion years ago when the universe was created, but let's say, again, I'm just picking numbers kind of out of a hat, but let's say 4 billion years ago, a billion years after the earth was already created. That's where Genesis starts. And when we understand it that way, then the whole thing makes a lot of sense, and it gets rid of a lot of confusion that we see in most translations, and not only just in most translations, of all of these arguments about how Genesis is nonsense, it doesn't make any sense, it contradicts science. Okay, so let's look at, we wanted to check out the word tohu. So if we look at tohu, let me get rid of this now. So if we look at tohu, we could see it occurs a bunch of times. Most recently, we saw it in Deuteronomy 32. That was actually just 2 weeks ago we studied that. And I think I mentioned it at this point that we'll talk about this word very soon. And so this is Moshe's speech, Ha'azinu, at the end, about a month before his death, or maybe 2 months before his death. We don't have an exact date. So let's just see it in its context. Right? This is the poem, the song that Moses taught to Israel before he died. Hazinu Hashemayim, Dabra v'tishma aretz imrei pi. Hear, O heavens, and I shall speak. Listen, O earth, to the words of my mouth. Okay. And then we have in, oops, where was it? It was 32:10. So this is Yahweh recalling or recounting his history with Israel, or Moses actually recounting Yahweh's history with Israel. And it says in Deuteronomy 32:10, Yim sa'ehu, Be'eretz midbar, b'tohu yilel yishmon. That's all we have to go up to. We'll just do the first verselet. It's actually technically called a verset, but I like to call it a verselet. So he found him in Be'eretz midbar, in a desolate land, or in a land, a wilderness land, desert land, a wilderness land. B'tohu yilel yishmon. And in a, and here we have the word tohu, in a devoid place, in an empty place, in an unformed place, yilel yishmon, a howling, it's usually translated as a howling wilderness. So as an empty howling wilderness might be a good translation, okay? The point is here that tohu here is speaking about where Yahweh found Israel. This is a reference. This is a reference to the desert when God brought Israel out of Egypt into the desert. This is the Yilel Yishmon. This is the howling wilderness that he's talking about. That's where, poetically speaking, he found it, because this is where Yahweh called Israel to Mount Sinai and spoke to Israel, gave Israel the 10 Commandments, began speaking to Israel, and began giving his instructions. She'd already given instructions a little bit before. At any rate, the point is that here we have the word tohu, and tohu in this case represents a land devoid of anything, or an unformed land, a land with nothing in it. Let's see how they translate it here. Hold on a second. A wasteland. There we go. And it gives that same impression of something of an existence with nothing there, right? That's kind of empty, that's kind of void. That's why often in Genesis you'll hear this translated as void and unformed. Tohu vavohu. That's the standard translation that you'll see. In fact, we can look at that. If we go to our English translations for that. NIV. Here, the NIV translates it as formless and empty. If we go, no, that's not what I wanted. Parallel. Oops. Genesis 1:2. So formless and empty, without form and void. Formless and void, that's your standard translation. Okay? Formless and void. Formless and desolate emptiness. Formless and void. Formless and void. Formless and void. Etc. This is interesting. I've never seen that before. The earth was formless and void, or a waste and emptiness. They're giving two possibilities there. Okay, formless and empty, you get the idea. Okay? But what it really means is that it was not in its current form. The things that are now, right? There's this concept of chaos, and the idea of chaos, not in the mathematical sense where it means something completely different, but in the, I would say, I guess, the Greek sense of the word chaos. It means things are not separated out. Everything is mixed together in a jumble. In modern scientific terms, we would call this having a high entropy, right? I mentioned this last year. Entropy so we'll just give this kind of not formal definition, but entropy is a scientific concept as well as a measurable physical property that is most commonly associated with a state of disorder or randomness. So the higher entropy that a system has, then it means that it's more unformed. And I'll give the classic example. A classic example would be stirring cream into coffee. When you first pour cream into coffee, you could see the cream is separate from the coffee. And then you stir the coffee and it all comes together into one kind of light brown color, into one light brown liquid. That is a higher state of entropy because everything is mixed together. There's no distinctions between things. That's the Greek concept of chaos, where there's nothing distinguished. Another classic example of entropy is if you walk into, your child's room and it's a complete mess. Nothing's in order. Everything's all jumbled together. There's no distinctions between things. Things are not neat and orderly. Another classic example of entropy is when you take an ice cube and you put it into a cup of room temperature water. At the beginning, there's a distinction between the ice, which is cold, and the water, which is room temperature. But over time, the heat travels from the heat travels from the lukewarm water into the ice, which means that the ice melts, and then you get a kind of cold glass of water all at the same temperature. That's a high level of entropy. And if you want to separate back out that water into ice and, let's say, cold ice and warmer water, you have to do something. You have to add energy, and in fact, you have to add some kind of intelligence and some kind of intent. So tohu vavohu represents a high state of entropy where things are not yet separated out into their component parts. And that's what's really being spoken about here. And the rest of Genesis is going to be Yahweh using his intention, using his energy, using his intelligence to separate things out, to take this form of the earth, which is in its primordial form, where things are kind of all mixed together, and separate them out into the current earth that we know. Okay, so I think enough said about all of this. Any comments, any questions? No? All right, then let's go on. And now let's keep this in mind as we continue on to the following verses. So we already mentioned this verse, and darkness was on the face of the deep waters. Again, this is often translated as the depths, but I can't think of any exception in the Tanakh where the word tahom is not specifically speaking about water. Let me look just very briefly. So Ma'anot tahom. So this is with the flood, Noah's flood. So it says the well springs of the depths of the great deep, they translate it as, burst open. So again, we're talking about water, right? Tahom means the under the sea, the well springs of water sprung up from the depths. Same thing here. And this is the blessing that Jacob gives to his sons before he dies. And so he's giving, I think this is the blessing for Joseph, if I'm not mistaken, and the blessing of the depths that swarm underneath, or that slather. I don't know. I can't think of the right word. Lies, they translate it here. That's a bad translation. But at any rate, again, it's speaking about the deep waters. It's talking about the seas, under the seas. This is talking about the Egyptian army. This is the song at the sea. After the Egyptians, the Egyptian army was covered over by the Red Sea after the Israelites passed across the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea. And this is talking about the depths covered over them, over the Egyptian army. Tahomot, again, it's speaking about water. So everywhere we look at it, we see that the word tahom doesn't just mean the depths. It's not like an abyss that you're looking off a cliff. It means the deep waters. And that's really the way it should be translated. Let's see. So Robert Alter just says the deep, okay, which kind of implies the deep waters. And Everett Fox is darkness over the face of the ocean. Very good. Nice. Rushing Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. So Everett Fox explicitly translates tahom as ocean, again implying deep waters. And that's really what it means. It means that the entire earth was covered with water. There was a giant ocean, and this is historically true. or scientifically true. The entire Earth was covered with one giant ocean. The dry continents had not yet poked through, or the water had not yet dried up enough, had not yet evaporated enough for dry land to poke through. And this is the state of the primordial Earth. And this could either be translated as the wind of God, and if so, it means some kind of wind that the early atmosphere caused across the surface of the Earth, or the surface of the water of the single ocean that covered the Earth at that point. Or it could mean the Spirit. I think it means the Spirit, but I guess one could make a case of this meaning some kind of physical wind that just traveled across this water-covered ocean. All right, let's go on to verse 3, and we'll talk about let there be light. And now we can understand what this really means. Completely misunderstood, in my opinion. Vayomer Elohim, Yehi or, Vayehi or. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. What the heck does that mean? Well, if this is usually understood as God creating light energy at the very beginning of the creation of the universe. In other words, again, a cosmological statement about, however many nanoseconds after the Big Bang, then light energy was created within the universe. In my strong opinion, this is not what it's talking about at all. If we understand now these verses, or we understand all of Genesis 1 as beginning when the earth is already created, again, not 15 billion years ago at the creation of the universe, but 4 billion years ago. Again, I'm just making numbers up a little bit, but you get the idea. 4 billion years ago, a billion years after the creation of the earth, then light was already in the universe. So what does this mean? Well, if we go back here, we see that when God began to create the heavens and the earth, God is now taking the primordial earth and he's forming it into the way that we know it. How do we know it? We look up, we see clouds, we see the sun, we see the stars at night, we see the moon at night. We see rain come down from the heavens. We look below, we see dry land. Or we go to the beach and we see the ocean, we see rivers, we see lakes. This is now Yahweh taking this chaotic, this high entropy primordial earth where everything is mixed together and separating things out and turning it and basically molding it almost like a baker would knead dough, kneading the earth into its current form. That's what Genesis 1 is talking about. And so when it says, let there be light, and there was light, it's not a cosmological statement about the creation of electromagnetic energy in the few nanoseconds after the Big Bang. This means that from the point of view of the earth, specifically of us standing on the surface of the earth, remember, the Torah is actually human-centric. It's not universe-centric. It's not even necessarily God-centric. Yes, God is the focus of everything, but the Torah is always giving perspective from our point of view of us standing on the earth, of human beings. Well, there weren't yet human beings, but if we were there, if we were standing on the surface of the earth, what we would see. That's the focus of the Torah. That's also the reason why the Torah doesn't really focus on the afterlife, what happens after you die, all of this kind of stuff. It's not relevant to the Torah. The Torah is talking about we as human beings in our lives, what we see, what we experience, what we have to do. That's where the focus of the Torah is. If you think of our life as a kind of a giant video game that we play for 70 or 80 or 90 years, and then, when then, our quarter runs out and we die or whatever, then that's really the focus of the Torah. It's talking about us as human beings experiencing life from the earth. Of course, this is before human beings were formed. But if we were there, this is what we would see. This would be our perspective. And it's very important to keep this in mind throughout the Torah. The Torah is human-centric. It's not even God-centric. It's God-focused, but it's not God-centric. Everything is spoken about from the point of view of the human. And this is why there's so many mistakes or misunderstandings, even among a lot of knowledgeable commentators. They miss the point. And so they think, and certainly those who are not are not Torah believers, then they certainly miss the point. So you'll get a phrase, for instance, like the sun goes, this Shemesh ba v'Shemesh yotzei. The sun comes out and the sun goes back, and the sun comes out and the sun goes away. And people say, oh, look how stupid these ancient Israelites were. They thought that the sun revolved around the earth, and that's why they say stupid things like the sun comes out and the sun, it's like a chariot that runs across the sky and then disappears or goes away at night. No, that's not the point. The Torah is not making scientific statements or cosmological statements. It's describing the experience of human beings standing on the surface of the earth, on the face of the earth, and saying and explaining things from their perspective. So yes, from our perspective, the sun comes up in the morning and the sun sets at night. It still does, right? How many people today who know all about Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson, or whatever the heck that guy's name is? The flunky that Carl Sagan, the affirmative action flunky that Carl Sagan nominated before he died. Even those of us today who watch all that stuff, we still say, oh, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, because from our perspective, that's what it does. And from the Torah's perspective, that's how we have to understand all of the Torah's, I wouldn't even call them scientific statements, all of the Torah's statements about what goes on around us in the natural world. It's all from the perspective of a human being standing on the face of the earth, on the surface of the earth. Okay, so yes, we'll get to that, Ariella and Ben. Okay, so when the Torah says, let there be light, and there was light, this means, what is this speaking about? This means if you were standing on the face of the earth, then at the beginning, the entire surface was covered with water. The atmosphere was so thick that you couldn't see through it. And then Yahweh decides to separate out the atmosphere enough that light can be seen through it. Okay, there was darkness beforehand. It says it explicitly in verse 2, that there was darkness on the face of the deep waters, the darkness on the face of the uni ocean that covered the surface of the earth, right? Choshech means darkness. That means the atmosphere was so thick that you could not see any light come through it. And again, this is scientifically true. The atmosphere of the earth was originally a very thick atmosphere, so much so that it blocked out the light. Oh, you say, well, how is that possible? What do you mean blocked out the light? Well, we can even see that on a very rainy day, or when there's a thunderstorm, right? When there are thunderstorms, well, it doesn't completely block out the light, but we see how dark it can get even in the middle of the day. If you've ever been through a hurricane or something like that, it gets even darker. You're like, wow, this is really freaky. And I'm not talking about solar eclipse or anything like that. So if even in our day and age, if you're in a thunderstorm where you have these, very tall cumulonimbus clouds that can go up, thousands and thousands of feet in height, or in a hurricane where you have a huge mass of those types of clouds, then we could see already how dark it can get on the surface of the earth. Well, if you take that and think of the atmosphere being even thicker, I don't know, maybe 10 times thicker or whatever, then you could see that the entire surface of the earth was dark. The atmosphere was so thick that no light would get through it. And if you stood on the surface of the earth, you wouldn't see any light even peeking through the atmosphere. That's how thick the atmosphere was until now. On the first day, and I don't even want to get into the whole day thing. We'll talk about it maybe a little bit. God said, let there be light, and there was light. What does that mean? That now, for the first time, the atmosphere was dissipating enough, was again, I don't remember all the scientific processes. I'd have to go back through it, but the atmosphere was dissipating enough, or was becoming thin enough, or maybe it was evaporating out into space, or maybe its gaseous makeup or its chemical makeup was changing to the point where now, if you're standing on the face of the earth, you could actually see light peeking through. You couldn't see the sun, you couldn't see the moon, you couldn't see the stars, just like you can't on a cloudy day, but it would look like a cloudy day or a very cloudy day. That's what this is speaking about. It's not speaking about the cosmological creation of light at the beginning of the Big Bang. It's speaking about the atmosphere of the Earth starting to thin out or starting to burn off enough or starting to change its chemical makeup enough so that if you were standing on the face of the Earth, beforehand you would only see choshech al panei tehom, darkness on the surface of the deep waters. And now, who knows, millions of years later, now finally you could start seeing some light come through the atmosphere so that if you're standing on the face of the Earth, which was still all watery, then it wouldn't look like the black of night anymore. That's what let there be light means. Okay? Excuse me for 1 second. Shabbat shalom. Okay, sorry about that. Of course, there's always a lot of distractions here. All right. Hunky? I don't know, man. This one sounds a little bit suspicious. Device is not connected. I don't know. I'm booting this guy. I don't know what the heck he wants. All right. Goodbye. So, yeah, we'll talk about that, Yoshi Ben. You're right. And when the separation of the atmosphere happens, that's when we can start seeing the sun, the moon, and the stars. Just like if it's a cloudy day, you ain't seeing the sun, the moon, and the stars, right? You're just seeing light. You know it's not dark out. You can still distinguish when there's day and when there's night, but you still can't see the sun, the moon, and the stars. It's just a cloudy day. Watch, you'll see it makes perfect sense. Okay. Verse 4. Yar Elohim et or kitov. Kitov. Uyavdel Elohim ben or ben choshech. And God saw that the light was good, and God distinguished between the light and the darkness. Let's go on to verse 5. We'll go up to here. V'yikra Elohim la'or yom u'lachoshech kara laila. And God called the light day, and he called the darkness night. So this is the first time that if you're standing on the surface of the earth that you can tell the difference between daytime and nighttime. Finally, the atmosphere is dissipated enough that during the day, enough light comes through that it doesn't look completely dark as it did at the beginning. I won't say in the beginning, that's a loaded word, as it did previously when dark was upon the face of the watery depths, of the deep waters. That's what it means here. This is not some kind of, again, creation of day or night. What is it? What would that even mean? The concepts of day and night have no meaning except from the face of the earth. Day and night is not some cosmological concept. Day means when it's light out. Night means when it's not light out. That's what it means always in the Torah, and some similar things by extension. But that's basically what it means always in the Torah. Okay, Lavi, what are you doing? Boo. Boo. All right. I always have cats running around all over the place. Okay. So this is what we're talking about here, that God made his distinction between the light and the darkness. He called the light day, and he called the darkness night. So now this finally is a distinction. Before, in verse 2, it didn't matter when you were standing on the face of the earth, again, as if you were there. If you were standing on the face of the earth at that time, you could never see any light. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I won't even use those terms, but all the time it was dark on the face of the earth because the atmosphere was too thick. Now, for the first time, light is able to peek through the atmosphere. Yes, you cannot yet see the sun, the moon, and the stars, but enough light is able to peek through the atmosphere that you could say, oh, wait a second. It's daytime out, just like you can on a cloudy day. On a cloudy day, you can't see the sun, the moon, and the stars, but you know when it's day out and you know when it's night out, even if you're in the middle of a thunderstorm. Even if you're in the middle of a hurricane, you know when it's day out and you know when it's night out. And that's what's being spoken about here on the first day. So on the first day, we're not talking about the creation of electromagnetic energy nanoseconds after the Big Bang, blah, 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 blah. No, we're talking about, again, I'll just make up numbers. We're talking about instead of 4 billion years ago in verses 1 and 2, now it's maybe 3 billion years ago, maybe it's a billion years later, and finally the primordial atmosphere is dissipated enough that light can peek through during the day, because obviously it ain't peeking through at night, such that you can tell if you were standing on the surface of the earth, you can make a distinction between when it's day and when it's night. It hasn't dissipated enough to the point where you could see through the atmosphere to the sun, the moon, and the stars, but enough light is now reaching the earth, the surface of the earth, so that you can make a distinction between day and night. And this is considered good. So God's creation, God's moving from tohu vavohu, void and unformed, or from a state of chaos, from a state of high entropy to a state of low entropy. And if you want to move from a state of high entropy to a state of low entropy, you need to add energy to the system. But more than energy to the system, you need to add intent and you need to add intelligence. It's forming something, okay? If I want to take a block of clay and form it into a statue, please no statues to Molech or to Moshe or whoever, but if I wanted to make into a statue of a lion and not bow down to it, if I wanted to make it into a statue of a lion, then I would have to add energy, I would have to have intelligence, I would have to have intent. And that's good. Yahweh is now adding his energy, intelligence, and intent to take a high entropy system where everything's mixed together, where everything is, again, the Greek sense of chaos, where there are no distinctions between the parts, and now using his intelligence, energy, and intent to form something, to create something, just like we do every day, whatever we're doing, whether it's writing an article, whether it's cleaning up the house, whether it's working, right? We are taking chaos and making it into order. We're adding energy, intelligence, and intent to form something out of nothing. And that's the essence of the act of creation that Yahweh does in Genesis 1. And it's the essence of our existence on this earth, that we have the energy in this physical world through our bodies that Yahweh gave us for 70, 80, 90 years. We have the intent and we have the intelligence to create things in this earth. And that's why we are made in Yahweh's image. That's really the essence of what that means. That and the fact that we as human beings can distinguish between right and wrong as Yahweh can. That's the essence of what makes us human beings. And we play this out in this video game called life for 70, 80, 90 years. And then we disappear off the face of the earth and go somewhere that is not relevant to the Torah, because the Torah is concerned about what we do during those 70, 80, 90 years and what we leave to the next generation. Okay. So let's go on. Any comments? Any questions so far? So the sun wasn't created until the fourth day. Where did this light come from? No, incorrect, Yoshi Ben. The sun was already created. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, the sun is already created. That's what I'm trying to say. Genesis 1 does not pick the story up at the Big Bang. It picks the story up long after the solar system was already created, long after the planets were already in place, long after the earth was already created. It's just that the earth is there in a primordial state where there's a uni ocean covering the surface, and where the atmosphere is so thick that no light can reach through from the sun down to the surface of the earth. Okay? This is the mistake that everybody makes with Genesis 1. It's not a story about starting with the Big Bang. It's not a Big Bang story. Okay? Great. Whatever you believe in, whatever you don't believe in. The sun is not created on the fourth day, as we will see. The sun becomes visible from the surface of the earth on the fourth day. Let's go on and see that for ourselves. God made a distinction between the light and the darkness. We read this already, but we'll read it again. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Day and night. Day and night have absolutely no meaning to us unless we're on the surface of the earth. Okay, if we're in a spaceship out, beyond, I don't know, the Oort belt, in some kind of interstellar space, that day and night have no meaning to us. Day means the sun is out. Night means the sun is not out. And that's what's being spoken about here. Vayhi erev vayhi boker yom echad. And so it was evening and morning, yom echad, one day, or we can even translate that as the first day. This whole idea of what a day means, I really don't want to even get into it. I think that the person who's done the best work on this is Gerald Schroeder, Genesis and the Big Bang. When I first came to Israel in the early 1990s, I had the pleasure of learning directly under him at the yeshiva Eshet Torah. He would teach a regular class there. And I think his ideas, although they're very rabbinical in some ways, are generally on target. So if you want to find out more about his ideas regarding what a day means, and again, I don't want to get into it now because we'll just go off onto a tangent, but basically it has to do with Einstein's theory of time dilation, that a day does not necessarily mean a day. It all depends on your perspective. Then you could check out this book that you see on the screen. It's Genesis and the Big Bang by Gerald Schroeder. Yes, he's very rabbinical, but I think he really hit on something. And that's the best theory I've heard that I've heard so far. Oh boy, I'm going to have to plug in a second. So we'll deal with that in a second. All right. So, but I don't want to focus on that because it'll just get us off on a tangent. So whatever a day means, okay? But notice that there is no concept of a day and a night, erev v'boker, evening and morning, yom echad, until after God has already created day and night. It's only after God has created day and night that we see this concept of an evening and a morning. And all of these words have very, very specific meanings in the Torah. Yom has a very specific meaning. Where is it? Laila has a very specific meaning. Erev has a very specific meaning. And Boker has a very specific meaning. Okay? We've spoken about this many times. Okay? And yes, there are some other meanings. There's some meanings by extension of these words, but the basic meaning of the word Yom is from the time the sun rises until the time the sun sets. The basic meaning of the word Laila is when the sky is at maximal darkness. So after evening is over and before dusk begins. The basic meaning of Erev is the time between sunset and maximal darkness, what we call dusk in modern English. And the specific meaning of the word Boker in the Torah is when the sun first rises, when the sun first peeks out over the eastern horizon. Okay, let's move on. ויאמר אלוהים יהי רקיע בתוך המים, ויהי מבדיל בין מים למים. And God said, let there be a rakia. Rakia is usually translated as firmament. We'll get back to that word in a second. I'll just leave it as firmament for a second. So let there be a firmament among the waters. Wahi mabdil bin mayim lamayim, and let it make a distinction, or let it separate between water and water. What the heck does that mean? Oh my God. Well, the first thing to understand here is that the word rakia does not mean firmament. Rakia, the underlying verb, and this has been pointed out, I think, many times. I pointed it out in the past. I think other Torah scholars have pointed it out, that the word rakia comes from the underlying word resh kuf, or the underlying root resh kuf ayin, which means to beat out into a thin sheet, kind of like tinfoil. Sometimes you'll see this translated as a dome. Okay, so another typical translation, which is a little bit better than firmament, would be God said, let there be a dome among the water that separates between water and water. But it's not really a dome, and sometimes this idea of there being a dome is misused by the flat earther types. Believe it or not, there are a couple of Karaite flat earthers. Go figure. But it'll be used by the flat earther types to actually prove that the earth is flat and therefore is covered by a big dome. And rakia does not mean a dome. Rakia means a piece of metal that is beaten out so thin that it becomes a sheet, like a sheet of tinfoil. So maybe a better translation would be, V'yomer Elohim yehi rakia, and God said, let there be a thin sheet of separation between water, between hamayim, between the waters, and in this case, hamayim is actually means the plural, between the waters, and we'll see what that means in a second. That makes a difference, or that makes a separation between water and water. Let's see how some of our translators deal with this word rakia. A vault. So again, nobody knows what the heck that means, so it's almost a meaningless translation, although it's correct. A vault again means, I guess, a kind of a spread out thing. And Everett Fox, a dome. So yeah, again, that's kind of typical, would be that dome translation. But it really means like a film of separation, or a, how can I explain it? Again, I explained it by saying what raka means. Raka means to beat out a piece of metal until it's a thin piece of like tinfoil kind of thing. So let's even see it in another context. Maybe we can get the idea of what it really means. Let's see here. It's all Genesis 1. Yeah, we're not going to see it in a second. Ezekiel. I think we're going to have to go more to Raka. So let's do this. Okay, so the BDB, oh boy, I got to plug in my thing in a second. Translates it as an extended surface expanse, as if beaten out. Compare Job 37:18. Let's see if we can find Raka. Okay. So perfect. Exodus 39:3 will give us a good idea of what this word really means. So this is speaking about, this is the building of the tabernacle in Exodus. Let's just get it in context here. So this is the ephod. This is the garment, one of the priest's garments, the outermost garment of the priest. So verse 2 says, Exodus 39:2, V'ya'as et ephod zahav. V'ya'as et ephod, and he made the ephod, the outer garment of the priest, zahav, tchelet, v'argaman, v'tolat shani, v'sheish mashzar, gold, and tchelet, and blue, and purple, and scarlet, and fine linen, or let's go with fine linen. And here, verse 3, what yiraku et pachei zahav, and they beat out plates of gold. So here we see yiraku. That's the same root as rakia, and here we see that it means they beat out plates of gold, and then those plates of gold were basically used as those little pieces of gold, those thin pieces of gold, were basically used as threads to make the ephod. So here we see basically gold being beaten out so thin that it forms like little strips, and those strips are then integrated into the ephod. And that's that verb that's being used here is what yir'aku, they beat out, and that's what we're talking about, the same verb as, or the same root as here, rakia. So it means a beaten out piece of metal, piece of metal that's beaten out so thin that it forms like tinfoil. But again, it doesn't mean literally that there's a piece of metal in the sky. It means that there's this idea of separation between, as we'll see, the waters above and the waters below. And this rakia, which I'll explain a bit more what it really means in a second, is what is being made. But basically, that what's being spoken about here is a separation between the waters above and the waters below. All right, I have to plug in for a second. So let me just take a little break. I won't put on any music or anything like that. Shabbat Shalom, Tzuriel. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to get the plug. Oh, actually, one second. One second. See if that works. And yes, we're charging. Okay. So the idea is that there's this plate that separates between the waters above and the waters below, but it doesn't literally mean there's a plate there. Again, we have to understand that the entire, all of Genesis 1, and in fact, all of the Torah is being recited or is being told from the perspective of someone standing on the face of the earth. There were no human beings back then, but if we were, this is the way we would see things. This is the way we would perceive things. So what this really means is, if you look up into the sky today, remember, everything's from our perspective. If you look up into the sky, what you see in the sky, it looks like, from our perspective, it looks like a flat dome. Again, I'm a little bit reluctant to use the word dome because the flat earthers have taken that concept and tried to prove that there literally is some kind of dome above the sky or above the earth. But I'm talking about from our perspective. If you look up into the sky, it looks like the sky is a dome, right? It's almost like you could put a dome above the earth, and then you could paint clouds on it over here, and you could paint a sun over here, and you could paint the moon at night over there, and you could paint little dots representing the stars at night. That's what it's talking about. What it's talking about is the perceived concept of a flattened out strip of metal upon which covers the earth like a dome, upon which is painted all the stuff that we see up in the sky, the clouds, the stars, the moon, the sun, very specifically, and out of which comes the rain. And this is what it means, making a distinction between the waters that are above and the waters that are below, or between waters and waters. It's talking about that there now, for the first time, the earth is drying up enough so that the entire rain cycle begins, and that waters can actually come out of this dome, not a real dome, but a perceived dome from our perspective. And that's the waters from above. And then we have the waters from below. That's the waters in the seas, in the ocean. That's what it's speaking about here. Let's read that again. Verse 6. So God said, let there be I'm going to translate it here as dome. Okay, but again, a thinned out piece of metal upon which are drawn the clouds, the moon, the sun, the stars. But I'll just translate it as dome for a second, because I can't repeat that entire sentence every time we run into the word rakia. So let there be a dome among the water that separates between water and water. And we're going to see what that means in just a second. Let's go on to verse 7. V'ya'as Elohim et rakia. And God made this dome, this flattened out piece of metal, quote unquote, not for real. We have del ben hamayim asher mitachat rakia uben hamayim asher me'al rakia vayhi chen. And God made this quote unquote dome, and he separated between the water which was under the dome and between the water that was above the dome, and so it was. What does this mean? For the first time in the history of the earth, we have rain above and we have water below. Remember, if we go back to the earlier verses, we saw the entire surface of the earth was covered with water. The atmosphere was so thick that no light from the sun could even get through it. It was dark all the time, 24 quote unquote hours a day. Now things are separating out. Now, for the first time, we have water above, and we see this in contexts, in various contexts, such as during the flood story. We see that it speaks about the water that comes from above and the water that comes from below. So for the first time, there's a distinction between the waters below and the waters above. Beforehand, when the earth was originally in its primordial state, there was just a surface covered with water and an atmosphere so thick that not even light can get through it. There was no rain, there were no clouds, there was nothing. Now, for the first time, we have water coming from above, meaning rain, and we have water below, meaning the oceans below. But the oceans, at least in the second day, are still covering the entire surface of the earth. So again, we're talking about Yahweh slowly taking the earth and forming it from its primordial state into the current state that we know and love today. All right. The president called the astronauts from his landline phone while they were on the moon. Well, that's because he lost his cell phone, obviously. Okay. So, where were we? Verse 8. ויקרא אלוהים לרקיעת שמיים ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר יום שני. And God called this dome, quote unquote, sky. And it was evening and it was morning of the second day. So this sky, whenever the Torah speaks about sky, it means what we see when we look up from the face of the earth. Our perceived, it's not making scientific statements, our perceived, what we perceive when we look up from the face of the earth. And that's what's being spoken about here. Okay? So this is what we perceive when we look up from the face of the earth. It looks like we're looking at a dome above us. No, it's not really a dome above us, but that's what it looks like because we don't have depth perception. We can't tell if the sun is farther away than the stars, if the moon is closer, right? We don't see where the clouds, everything just looks like it's all flat. We don't have depth perception between the clouds and the sun and the moon and the stars. It looks like it's all painted on a dome. And this is figuratively speaking. It doesn't literally mean it. It means our perception from the ground, from the face of the earth. Verse 9. Wayomer Elohim yikawu hamayim mitahat hashamayim el makom echad wa tera'eh hayabasha wa yehi chen. So now, on the second day, we've made a distinction between the waters below, which is the uni ocean covering the surface of the earth, and finally the waters above. The atmosphere is dissipated enough that now there's a rain cycle. Rain clouds can start, or at least rain can start coming out of the skies, okay? And now the next thing that happens is the surface of the earth starts drying up. Verse 9, God said, let the waters gather together. Yikavu, that's where we get the word mikveh, which a mikveh, if you've heard in I guess it's not modern Hebrew, it's already, I guess, Mishnaic Hebrew. A mikveh may already be Tanach that we have the word mikveh, but it doesn't mean the same thing. But a mikveh, if you've heard of a mikveh, it's like a pool where you go to cleanse yourself of impurities if you're a rabbinite. So Wayomer Elohim yikavu hamayim mitachat hashamayim. So let the waters pool together. Let them gather together. I'll go with pool together. I like that. Let the waters pool together underneath the heavens. El makom echad, to one place with tira'eh hayabasha wa yehi chen, and let dry land, or let the dry land be visible, and so it was. So now the earth, the surface of the earth is drying up. That uni ocean is now drying up, and there are patches of dry land that are coming together. But it doesn't say it that way. It says, let the waters under the heavens gather together in one place. And what that means is, just 1 second, please. What that means is the waters are now receding from off the face of the earth and forming the oceans. And yes, it says together in one place. Well, we know all of the oceans are connected. All of them, right? Every single ocean is connected to every single ocean. And when that and then there's dry land in between the oceans. And that's what this is speaking about here. So in this later stage, right? As the earth is slowly turning from its primordial state into its modern state, now this is the next stage. Some of the earth is now, or some of the uni ocean is now drying up, and it's basically receding back and exposing dry land. That's what's happening here. And God is going to call these things by their names. Verse 10, Yikra Elohim le'yabasha eres ulemikwe hamayim karayamim. And God called the dry land Eretz, literally earth. In fact, the word earth comes from the Hebrew word Eretz. You can trace it through Aramaic and the various Greek into the Latin languages, where it becomes terra with something called metathesis. You can trace it into German, and then straight down into English. The word earth comes from the Hebrew word eretz. So eretz. So he called the dry land earth. Ulemikwe hamayim, and eretz is usually translated as land or dry land, but we'll go with earth. Ulemikwe hamayim karayamim, and to the pooling of the water, the places where the water pooled, he called the seas. Wayar Elohim kitov, and Yahweh saw that it was good. Again, he's using his energy, his intent, and his intelligence to form order out of chaos, to build something out of raw material. That is what is going on here. Okay. Any questions, any comments so far? Okay. All right, let's move on. Wayomer Elohim Tidasheh haaretz deshe esev mazriya zera etz pri ose pri lemino asher zera'o bo al haaretz vayehi chen. And God said, and by the way, notice that we have not yet seen the appearance of the word Yahweh. It always says Elohim. Elohim. The first appearance of the word Yahweh, in fact, does not even come in chapter 1. It only comes in chapter 2, and we'll see, of Genesis. So now God is not being called by his name. He's being called only Elohim, the kind of his title. Okay. Where were we? Okay. Wayomer Elohim Tadsheh haaretz deshe esev mazriya zera etz pri ose pri lemino asher zara'o bo al haaretz vayehi chen. And God said, let the earth, the dry land, sprout fields of grasses. Let's see how they translate desha here. Okay, so they say grassy herbs, but I'll just go with fields. Okay, one second, let me get it in Hebrew again. I'll go with carpets of herbs or carpets of grasses, with herby grass. Let's go with covered with carpets of grasses. So Elohim, God said, let the earth be covered with carpets of grasses, mazriya zera, that make seeds, literally that seed seeds, but that make seeds. Seed, in other words, plants that create seeds, which is a later form of life. Etz pri or pri, and fruit trees that produce fruits, limino, each according to its own kind. Asher zara'o bo, in which its seed is in it. In other words, the seed is inside the fruit. We know that the whole purpose of the fruit is to carry the seed. Ala aretz vayehi chen, upon the dry land, and so it was. Verse 12. What tutzeh haaretz desh esev mazriya zera liminehu Wa'etz osepri asher zera'o bo le'minehu wayar Elohim kito wayhi erev wayhi boker yom shlishi. And the land produced or brought out carpets of grass that made, or seed-bearing grasses, seed-bearing herbs, each according to its own type. Etz osepri, and trees and fruit-bearing trees, asher zera'o bo, in which the its seed was inside it, meaning the seed was inside the fruit. Lemineho, each according to his own type. V'yar Elohim kitov, and God saw that it was good. Wahi erev wahi boker yom shlishi, and it was morning and it was evening on the third day. So now we're going to get into what is usually considered a problem, but I'll explain why, in my opinion, it's not a problem at all. So now we have on the third day, we have the creation of plants on the face of the earth, or specifically plants that bear seed, because there are more primitive forms of plants that do not necessarily bear seeds. They reproduce in other ways. But this is more advanced. This is a fruit, flower, and tree and fruit-bearing plants. So what's the problem? Well, it looks like there's a problem. And the problem looks like it's going to be on the fourth day, but we're going to get back to that. So the third day is the creation of seed and fruit-bearing plants and trees. And now we have something that seems ridiculous, but we're going to see why it's not ridiculous in a second. Okay, verse 14. Wayomer Elohim yahi me'orot be'rikiah hashamayim lavdil ben hayom uven halayla wahayu le'otot u'lemo'adim u'liyamim u'wishanim. And God said, let there be lights or lighted objects in this dome, right? Quote unquote dome from our perception on earth, in this dome of the heavens, or in this sheet that's spread out above us, forming the sky. Lavdil ben hayom uven halayla, to make a distinction between day and night. Wahayu le'otot, and let them be for signs, u'lemo'adim, and for appointed times. And we know that the holidays such as Passover, Shavuot, etc., are called moadim. These means appointed times is usually translated as, but it basically means for times during the year. Uliyamim, wishanim, and to mark out the days and to mark out the years. Wahayu. Give me 1 second, please. Just have to adjust something here. So now we have these lights appearing in the sky. And what are the lights going to be? We're going to see in 1 second. Verse 15. And let these lights, these lighted objects in the sky, in the dome of the sky, the quote unquote dome of the sky, let them be to shine light upon the land, and it was so. Verse 16. And God made the two great lights, the two large lights, the bigger light to rule over the day, and the smaller light to rule over the night, and also the stars. So now it says that God made them. Wow, it makes it seem like on the fourth day, suddenly God decided to create the sun, the moon, and the stars. But that's not what it means. It means, again, from the perspective on the face of the earth, it means really make them visible or make them seen from the face of the earth. It would be nonsensical to say that on the fourth day, now God just creates the sun, the moon, and the stars, when already we have an earth that has dry ground and oceans and rain and plants, right? That would make the Torah absolutely nonsensical. And if you're a non-Torah believer, then of course this is the proof that the Torah is just a bunch of, of mumbo jumbo, of gobbledygook, because it's not possible that we can have all of the stuff that's spoken about before without first having the sun, the moon, and the stars. So either the Torah is complete nonsense or not either. And so therefore the Torah is complete nonsense, and the ancient Israelites were complete idiots, and that's why they wrote it. But this is ridiculous, because let's even say that the Torah is not from God. Let's even say that that's the case. You think the ancient Israelites were so stupid that they didn't realize that the sun and the moon and the stars had to be in existence before you could have plants and fruit trees and grass? Of course they realized this. This is nonsensical. So if this was not written by the hand of God, even if this was written solely by the hand of human beings, then they wouldn't write it this way. It would be nonsensical to say first there were plants and fruit trees and seed-bearing plants and fruit trees, and then all afterwards God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. Because any idiot, okay, knows that you need at least the sun to be able to have the plants grow. You don't have to understand the processes of photosynthesis and how it's done. But everybody knows that if there's no sun shining, you're not going to have any plants. And ancient Israelites and ancient people certainly understood that. So it couldn't possibly be that the people who wrote the Torah, if it was written by human beings, were so stupid that they actually mean that first the plants came along and then suddenly God made the sun, the moon, and the stars. That would make their document nonsensical, and for sure they knew enough not to do that if it was written by human beings. So what's really going on here? So we have on the third day, we have the creation of seed-bearing plants, again, which are more advanced forms of plants. They're more primitive forms of plants. But the seed-bearing plants and the fruit-bearing trees are created on the third day. And on the fourth day, the sun, the moon, and the stars are so-called created. But that's not really what's going on. On the third day, what we have to understand here, again, in my strong opinion, is what this is saying is that this was the beginning of that process. It's not talking about the end of the process. It means on the third day, the very beginnings of those types of plants, the seed-bearing plants, and eventually what grew into the fruit-bearing trees, that began on the third day. Doesn't mean the process ended before the fourth day started. It means that's when the process began. It began on the third day. Whatever the third day means. Again, if you want to know what I think the third day means, then go read Genesis and the Big Bang by Gerald Schroeder. If you could put up with all the rabbinical nonsense that he throws in there, then it's a really interesting read. But that's what it means. The process for modern plants, I won't even say modern plants, for more advanced plants began on the third day before the sun, the moon, and the stars. No, they were not created on the fourth day. That's when they began to be visible from the face of the earth. Remember, we have a process where the atmosphere is getting thinner and thinner and thinner. Originally, it's so thick that you can't even distinguish between night and day on the face of the earth. Everything is dark all the time. Then eventually you're able to let there be light. You're able to see light during the day and darkness during the night, but you're not yet able to see through the sun, the moon, and see through the atmosphere to witness the sun, the moon, and the stars, or to view the sun, the moon, and the stars. And then eventually eventually rain starts. Okay, that's in day 2. And then on the third day, then the uni ocean that covered all the face of the earth starts to dry up. Dry land starts to appear. And then this process continues. The earth continues to dry up. The atmosphere continues to get thinner and to dissipate. Then finally, on the third day, that's when plant life started sprouting on the face of the earth. Again, the key here is started sprouting on the face of the earth on the third day, and then the process continues, and then finally on the fourth day, the atmosphere becomes thin enough that you could see through it and actually see the sun, the moon, and the stars. And that is what is going on in Genesis 1, again, in my strong opinion. Okay? The ancient Israelites were not idiots. And the very fact, as I think it's actually Gerald Schroeder that points out, is that Genesis 1:1 proves that. So even if you take the standard translation as in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, one of the things that Gerald Schroeder points out is that this was not something that was realized until the mid 1900s, that there was even a beginning to the heavens and the earth, that there was even a beginning to the universe. Because up until then, almost all of science believed in the steady state universe, that the universe was always there and will always be there. And it was only in the mid 20th century, with the advent of this theory of the Big Bang, that science actually even began to say that there was a beginning to the universe. Before that, there was no concept in science, at least in modern science, of a beginning of the universe. The steady state theory, which is that the universe always existed and always will exist. So that already shows that the Torah knew something that science didn't even know until thousands of years later, and could be taken as a proof of the divinity of the Torah. But certainly, even if it's not proof of divinity of the Torah, one has to admit that ancient Israelites had to be, or were not so stupid that they didn't realize you need to have the sun at the very least in order for plants to grow. So it couldn't be that they really believed that the plants and the fruit trees sprung up on the third day. That entire process. Oh shoot, what's going on now? Stupid thing. I get the beach ball turning around again. I don't know why this has been happening lately. Just gonna have to wait a second here. I don't know why it does this lately. Somebody does it out of nowhere. Stuck. All right, we're just gonna have to wait for a second. I'm sorry. I know you guys can hear me. Well, I guess I can't move this thing up and down. I don't think I can. No, it's stuck. It's Chrome. I'm with Chrome. Maybe I'll have to uninstall Chrome and reinstall it or something like that. This has now been happening almost every week. But at any rate, all right, let me see if I can go on. Assuming you guys can hear me, oh, what the heck? What's going on here? Jeez. Okay, now we're back to normal, I think. Let me just check in. Can you guys hear me? Okay, sound check. Can everybody hear me? Somebody just let me know if you can hear me. Sound check. Somebody give me a yes. Type it in. Can you? Okay, good. All right, thanks. Just wanted to make sure. Chrome has been acting very strange lately. Okay, so, right. So what this really means, again, in my strong opinion, is plants began to sprout on the earth on the third day. Doesn't mean this process ended. It means it started. Then, afterwards, the atmosphere began to dissipate enough that eventually the sun, the moon, and the stars were able to peek through the clouds. And for the first time, they were visible from the face of the earth. Before that, the earth was completely covered in clouds, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yes, you could see when it was night and you could see when it was day by whether the clouds, just like you can on a cloudy day today, but you could not peek through the clouds to see the sun, the moon, and the stars. It was always cloudy. And this process was a continuing process that started at the beginning when the atmosphere was so thick that you couldn't even distinguish between day and night. Eventually, as the atmosphere dissipated, you could distinguish between day and night. That process continued until the day got brighter and brighter and brighter, and eventually the clouds dissipated enough that you could see through them and see the sun, the moon, and the stars for the first time, however many, let's say 2 billion years ago. I'm making it up. Okay, so let's just read through this. We already read that, actually. Did we? No, I'll read through it again. Yomer Elohim. I'll read through it again, whether we did or didn't, and I'll just translate, and you guys will get the idea. Yomer Elohim yehi me'orot birakia shamayim lavdil ben hayom uben halayla. And God said, let there be lights in the sky, or lit objects in the sky, in the dome of the sky, quote unquote dome of the sky, to make a distinction between the day and the night. Wa'il otot, and let them be for signs. ulemoadim, and for appointed times or yearly holidays, uliamim, and for days, and to mark off days, ueshanim, and to mark off years. Verse 15, Wayehu lemeorot, Ohayu lemeorot berakia shamayim, laha'ir ala aretz vayichen, and let these lights, or let the purpose of these lights in the dome of the sky to be to shine light upon the earth, and so it was. Verse 16, Waya'as Elohim et shnei hameorot gedolim, and God made, or God allowed to be visible, I'll translate it as, God made appear from the surface of the earth the two great lights, et ha'maor gadol lememshelet hayom, the larger light to rule over the day, and the smaller light to rule over the night, and the stars. Verse 17. And God placed them in the dome of the sky. Again, figuratively speaking, from our point of the earth, that's what it looks like. We look up in the sky, it looks like a giant dome, it looks like a giant piece of plastic that's been spread out, and clouds, stars, the moon, the sun are painted on it. La'ir ara aretz, to shine light upon the earth. Verse 18. Limshol b'yom u'balayla, and to rule over the day and the night. Ulavdil ben ha'or u'ben ha'choshech, and to make a distinction between periods of light and periods of darkness. Wa yar Elohim kitov, and God saw that it was good. Every time He creates, he's again, God can be thought of like as a sculptor who's taking a lump of clay and slowly but surely molding it into something more and more towards the finished product. And every time He goes and every time the next stage in that process happens, then I don't know about every time, but usually it's said that this is good because God is using His will, His intelligence, and His intention to form something that's just a lump of clay into something that has definition and distinctions and order rather than chaos. Verse 19, Wayhi boker yom revi'i, and it was the evening, and it was the morning of the fourth day. Verse fifth day. Now we get the fish and the birds. Wayomer Elohim yishretzu hamayim sheretz nefesh haya va'oth yefef al haaretz al pnei rakia hashamayim. And God said, let the waters swarm with the swarms of living animals. And let flying, we'll go with birds, but it really means anything that flies. Let flying animals, or let birds fly over the earth, al pnei rakia shamayim, on the face of the dome of the sky. So this is really, again, emphasizes what is meant by the dome of the sky, or the plastic sheet that is painted out, that is stretched out over the sky. So the birds are flying on the face of it. So if we look up at it, we'll see, from our point of view, we see these animals moving across this, it's almost like watching a movie on a big screen that's in the form of a dome above us. That's the analogy, or that's what the Torah is saying from our point of view on the face of the earth. We see these animals flying across this giant, I guess it's almost like an IMAX screen, right? Maybe that's the way Rakia should be translated, as a giant IMAX screen. So on this IMAX screen, we see these things moving fast across it, and these are the birds, or these are the flying things. Really talking about the birds. So now we have, on the fifth day, we have not the creation of the fish, or of the creatures in the ocean, or the creation of the birds or the flying things in the sky. We have the proliferation of them. Yes, they might have been there beforehand, but they were small, they were insignificant. Now, yishretzu means to swarm, or to, let's see, I'll translate it here, let abound. So that's even better, right? Let the waters abound with massive amounts of living animals. So we're not talking again about the creation of fish and birds on the fifth day. We're talking about the proliferation, that now the earth is in such a state that these animals, which again require lower form animals, right? Fish, birds, these are not autotrophs. They are not organisms that can make their own food. They're organisms that rely on they're heterotrophs, meaning they rely on consuming other living organisms in order to survive. And so until those other living organisms, meaning the more simple forms of life, are in place, they cannot proliferate. Now everything's in place for the birds and the fish to be able to just to multiply in the oceans and above the skies. And this is what the fifth day is speaking about. So again, this is a misnomer that's speaking about the creation of the fish and the birds on the fifth day. It's not. It's speaking about the proliferation. Everything's in place. The lower forms of life are now in place. The sun, the moon, the stars, all of what we know. Again, the earth is little by little is being molded from its primordial form into its modern form. And now we get to the stage in the fifth day where the situation is correct for these forms of life to explode, right? And aren't there? I'd have to again look back, but don't we have various periods in the history of the earth where there was a massive proliferation of living organisms, right? Wasn't it called the Precambrian? I believe Precambrian explosion. Let's just look at that for a second. For the Cambrian explosion. Let's read about that just to get an idea of what's being spoken about. So just give me 1 second here. Let me give the cat a little bit of food. Meow. He's still kind of a kitten, so we feed him whenever he wants. Come here, Shushi boy. Come here, Shushi. You want to be a good cat? Come here. Come here. There you go. Okay. So, right. So this might not be speaking specifically about, well, let's read it. So the Cambrian explosion, biological Big Bang, refers to an interval of time approximately 538.8 million years ago in the Cambrian period of early Paleozoic, when there was a sudden radiation of complex life and practically all major animal phyla started appearing in the fossil record. It lasted for about 13 to 25 million years and resulted in the divergence of most modern metazoan phyla. So metazoans are, there you go, means like multicellular animals, or here it is, multicellular eukaryotic organisms. So multicellular, we know what that means. Eukaryotic means they have nucleus, because more primitive forms of life do not have nuclei within their cells. Okay, the event was accompanied by major diversification in other groups of organisms as well. Before early Cambrian diversification, most organisms were relatively simple, composed of individual cells or small multicellular organisms occasionally organized into colonies. As the rate of diversification subsequently accelerated, the variety of life became much more complex and began to resemble that of today. Almost all present-day animal phyla appeared during this period, including the earliest chordates. So chordates means those with with backbones. So, a 2019 paper suggests that the timing should be expanded back to include the late Ediacaran. Well, we can skip that part, doesn't matter. Okay, so it seems, if you ask me, that this is speaking about the Cambrian explosion. Right? Let's read it again. Close this out. That's Exodus. So once again, it does not say that on the fifth day fish and birds were created. It says very specifically, "V'yomer Elohim yishretzu hamayim sheretz nefesh chaya ve'of Ya'ofef ala aretz al penei rakia hashamayim. And God said, Yishritzu. This verb Yishritzu means to swarm out, to multiply abundantly. Here they translate it once again as let abound. In fact, let's even look at this word a little bit more closely. Swarm, team. That's the way they usually team. T-E-E-M. Okay? To breed abundantly, to increase greatly, populate abundantly, swarms, team. BDB says swarm, team. So that's what happened on day 5, not the creation of life or of animals. There might have been primitive life before then, but the rapid proliferation, the teeming of life in the oceans and in the skies. We also know that before animals appeared on the face of the earth, that or I should say mammals appeared on the face of the earth, that there were already lots of flying creatures in the sky. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. Let me just quit this. Second, please. Okay. Verse 21. So again, getting back to this Cambrian explosion, let's read a little bit more. Is anything else that's worth saying here? No, I think we get the idea. Okay. Verse 21. Let's check it to see if there's any questions or comments. Okay. Verse 21. Why yibra Elohim et ataninim hagedolim wa et kol nefesh hachaya haromeset asher shartzu hamayim liminehem wa et kol of kanaf liminehu wa yar Elohim kitov. So verse 21, God created one second. So God created Ataninim Agdolim, so the great serpents, the great sea creatures, sometimes it's translated as, here they translate it as sea creatures. We'et kol nefesh achaya haromeset asher shatzu hamayim leminehu we'et kol of kanaf leminehu uyar Elohim kitov. Okay, let's pick this apart. So God created Ataninim Agdolim, so the giant sea creatures. Let's look at Taninim for a second. So they translated here as serpent, dragon, sea monster. Okay. All right. So I think from the context here, even though in other places it doesn't necessarily mean sea monsters, but yeah, it seems to be speaking about great creatures. Let's call them sea serpents or something like that, maybe. Wa'et kol nefesh hachaya haromeset. And all of the living creatures that romes means to creepy crawly or that move. Which the water teamed with according to their own type. So yes, this seems to be up to here seems to be the sea creatures. And again, we see a pattern because beforehand God said he's going to do something and then he does it. So here he says he's going to create the sea creatures, or he's going to make the sea team swarm with creatures and the sky swarm with creatures. And here he does it. These are the creation of the sea creatures. With kol of kanaf liminehu, and each type of flying animal or bird, according to its type, according to its species or its type. So this is now the fulfillment. Verses 21 is the fulfillment of what God said he's going to, what Elohim says he's going to do in verse 20. Wayar Elohim kitov, and God saw that it was good. Okay. Verse 22. Wayivarech otam Elohim lemor, and God blessed them, saying, Peru urevu, umelu et hamayim bayamim wa'of yerev ba'aretz. Okay, so God blessed them and said, Peru urevu, be fruitful and multiply. There are only two sets of creatures, or really, I guess, three sets of creatures, but only two statements where creatures are given this blessing, be fruitful and multiply. We know that the human beings are given the blessing, be fruitful and multiply, but here is the only other time, at least in the beginning of Genesis, where creatures are given the blessing, be fruitful and multiply. And this is here to the sea creatures, to the sea swarming with sea creatures, and the sky swarming with flying creatures. And they're given this blessing, be fruitful and multiply, and this proves that it's a blessing and not a commandment, as a particular Karaite so many years ago taught me, and he is 100% correct, because God does not give commandments to animals. He can give blessings to animals, but he can't give commandments to animals, because animals cannot follow commandments. They do what they do out of instinct, but they don't follow commandments. Only human beings can follow commandments. Therefore, this proves right here the fact that, first of all, it says God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. It says right there that it's a blessing, not a commandment, but also the very fact that it said about the sea creatures and the sky creatures proves that it cannot be a commandment, rather a blessing, because animals cannot be given commandments. Milu etamayim b'yamim, fill the waters that are in the seas. Remember, we saw earlier that when the wet part of the earth, or the water covered part of the earth, was separated out and the dry land appeared, that the water part was called the yamim. So this means the oceans, seas, I guess we could say in general, because it could also include like the Mediterranean Sea, etc. So fill the waters, so fill the waters of the seas, and let the flying creatures multiply above the earth, or on the earth. Verse 23, and so it was the evening and the morning of the fifth day. Okay, and finally, we see here the sixth day. Just check back in to see if there are any questions or any comments. Okay, verse 24. Wayomer Elohim tutse haaretz nefesh haya limina behema waremes wahayto eretz limina wayichen. And God said, let the land bring forth living creatures, each according to their type. Behema are large mammals, I guess you can call them as mammals. Maybe we'll go with remes and creepy crawly things. So that would be more like snakes, lizards, even insects, and all kinds of wild animals of the earth. Limina, according to the types, so now we have basically the modern land creatures. And what the Torah is basically saying, again, is originally we had the sea creatures, and then we had flying things in the sky, or at least the beginning of this process, and then it was only later that modern animals, as we know them, started crawling on the land. And there might have been some primitive animals on the land, but this is really referring more to modern animals. I think you all get the idea of where I'm coming from my understanding of Genesis 1. Verse 25, Ya'as Elohim et hayat haaretz dimina, and God made appear, I would say. God made the animals of the land, like each according to their type, wa et habehema dimina, and the large mammals according to their type, et kol remes adama, and all the things that crawl on the ground. So that would include the snakes, insects, even things like mice, rats, liminehu, according to their type. Wayar Elohim kitov, and God saw that it was good. That's on the 6th day. So now we have the creation of modern land animals. Verse 26. Wayomer Elohim na'aseh adam b'tsalmenu ki dmutenu. And God said, let us make man in our image and according to our likeness. وَيَرْدُوا بِدَغَاتْ hayam u'be'of hashamayim, and let them rule, let the men, the human beings, rule over the fish of the sea and the flying creatures in the sky, the birds of the sky, u'behema, and the land creatures, the large land animals, u'bechol ha'aretz, and over all the land, u'bechol haremes haromes ala aretz, and of all the things that crawl along the ground. Verse 28, Wayivra Elohim et ha'adam, and God made human beings, b'tzalmo u'b'tzelem Elohim, b'tzelem Elohim bara oto. God made Adam, or maybe the first man, or maybe this just means human beings in general. In his image, in the image of God, he created him. Zachar u'nekeva bara otam. Male and female, he created them. So that would imply that here, when it says he created Adam, also the fact that it has ha, the definite article beforehand, this would imply that this is speaking about humankind or human beings in general. So let's reread that. Vayivra Elohim et Adam. So God created human beings in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Zachar nekeva bara otam. Male and female, he created them. So this is again speaking abstractly, males and females, he created them. I think the only reason here it switches from the singular to the plural, here it's created him, but it doesn't mean him. It's an abstract form. It means it's called the abstract singular. It's using a singular verb to represent the whole, as we might do in even in English. We might say God created the human, and that means all human beings. But here now it points out that he creates male and female, and now it switches over, created them. And I think the only reason it switches over, this is still meant to be the abstract singular, but there are two this time, male and female, and so it switches over to created them. At any rate, that's a bit technical. I don't want to linger on that. Verse 28. Wayivarech otam Elohim, and God blessed them. Wayomer lahem Elohim, and God said to them, Peru urevu, be fruitful and multiply. Here we have again the second time, and the second of only two times that creatures are given this blessing, and it's actually word for word the same. Wayivarech otam Elohim, wayomer lahem Elohim, Peru urevu. That's to the human beings, be fruitful and multiply. To the fish and the birds, we have, where is it? Wayivarech otam Elohim lemor, Peru urevu. So it's slightly different actually. Here it says, Uyamer lahem Elohim, God said to them. Here it says, saying, Peru urevu, be fruitful, multiply, milu et hamayim, and then it goes on. Okay, but it's the same blessing essentially. Be fruitful and multiply, proving once again, because that blessing is given to the fish and the birds, or the sea creatures and the sky creatures, proving that it's not a commandment but a blessing. So here the human beings are blessed with the blessing of be fruitful and multiply. And here, milu et haaretz v'kivshuha uredu b'dagat hayam u'ba'of hashamayim b'chol chayat haromeset ala haaretz. and fill the land, fill the earth, and conquer it. Redu, and rule over the fish or the sea creatures and the flying creatures, or the creatures that fly in the sky, the creatures that swim in the sea, and all of the animals that crawl along the ground, that swarm or not swarm, that crawl or that scurry along the ground, might be a good translation for that. Okay. So again, let's compare the two blessings. So in Genesis 1:22, God says to the sea creatures and to the creatures, the flying creatures, God bless them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters of the seas, and let the flying creatures multiply above the earth. And then God says to the human beings when he creates them, and God created them, and said to them, Elohim, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, kiv shuha, and conquer it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and the creatures that fly in the sky, and all of the creatures that scurry along the ground. Verse 29, Elohim, and God said, Hine, natati lachem et kol esev zorea zera asher al pnei kol haaretz et kol ha'etz asher bo pri etz zorea zara lachem yeh le'achla. And God said, behold, I've given you, speaking again to the human beings, not directly, but I think speaking about them or speaking figuratively to them, I've given to you all of the seed-bearing plants, called esev zorea zera, all of the seed-bearing plants, asher al pnei kol haaretz, that are all that cover the entire face of the earth, v'et kol ha'etz asher bo pri etz, and all of the trees that have in them fruits of those trees, zorea zera, that produce seeds or that have seeds within them. These will be for you for food, for nourishment. So we saw earlier on day 3, we saw the creation. Where was it? Right here, verse 12. And the land brought forth carpets of plants, of seed-bearing plants, each according to their type, and trees that make fruits in which the seed is in them. In other words, fruits that have seeds inside, according to their types. And God saw that it was tov, so that it was good. So on the third day, we have the creation of the plants and of the seed-bearing plants and the fruit-bearing trees, which are another type of seed-bearing plants, except that now they have these fruits, and inside the fruits are the seeds. So the seed-bearing plants and the fruit-bearing trees. And now here in verse 29, we're told that those very things that were created on day 3 are now going to be, what's the reason they were created, or what's one of the reasons they were created? To be food for the human beings. And also, of course, for the animals. Verse 30 says that. ולכל חיית הארץ, ולכל עוף השמיים, ולכל רומס על הארץ אשר בו נפש חיה, את כל ירק עשב לאכלה ויחן. And for all of the animals on the land or on the earth, and all of the creatures that fly in the sky, and all of the creatures that scurry across the land, in which there is a bo nefesh chaya, in which there is a life essence. Sometimes we translate nefesh to soul, but it really means in which there is a life essence. I'll translate it as et kol yarak esev lachla, all of the green grass, lachla wayichen, I've given as food, and so it was. And I think this green grass implies by, or includes by implication, also includes the fruit trees, even though it's not mentioned explicitly. Okay. Verse 31, V'yar Elohim et kol asher sa, v'hine tov me'od. And Yahweh took stock, literally saw, but I think it means more like took stock of or beheld all, that kind of sat back and looked at all that he had made, all that he had done. V'hine tov me'od, and behold, it was very good. V'hi erev v'hi boker yom shishi. And it was the evening and it was the morning of the sixth day. And that brings us to the end of Genesis chapter 1. There's so much more to say about so many different things here. But if we do, we'll never move forward. As it is, I'm probably going to stop in about 20 minutes or so. But that is Genesis 1. So I hope my take on Genesis 1 is clear. The main points I'd like to say once again are that this does not say in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. It says when God began to create the heavens and the earth, began to create the heavens and the earth. The heavens and the earth mean, from our perspective, standing on the surface of the earth, what we look up at, that's called Hashemayim, the heavens, and what we look down at, that's called the earth. And so this entire chapter in Genesis 1 is speaking about forming the earth from its primordial form after it's already created. Again, verse 2 says the land, the earth was. This proves that already at the beginning of Genesis, the earth was already created. I'm not saying that I don't believe in Big Bang. I'm saying that Genesis picks up the story not at the Big Bang, but 10 billion years later, after the earth has already been created and is in its primordial form. That's where Genesis is picking up the story, not at the Big Bang. Because here it says, Vaitah, it's the earth was. The very fact that it can say the earth was, tohu vavohu, in a state of chaos or in a state of disorder, implies that the earth already existed. And that's where the story is being picked up. Once again, Genesis 1 doesn't start 14.8 billion years ago, or whatever it is, 14.3 billion years ago at the Big Bang. It starts 10 billion years later when the solar system has already been formed. The sun, the moon, the stars are already in place. The earth is already in place, except the earth is in its primordial form. Its surface is covered with water, with a uni ocean, and its atmosphere is so thick that not even light from the sun can make it through the atmosphere. So it seems like it's nighttime all the time. That's where Genesis 1 picks up the story. That is my very, very strong opinion on it. And I think it's seeing it that way makes it 100% clear as to what is going on in Genesis 1. Okay. Creation of light. This is not speaking about the creation of electromagnetic energy at the Big Bang. It doesn't mean God made light. It means that God dissipated the atmosphere of the earth enough so that light started to be visible through the thick cloud cover, to the point where even though you could not yet see the sun, the moon, and the stars, what you could do is make a distinction between day and night, just like you can on a cloudy day. Even if it's completely cloudy and you can't see the sun, the moon, and the stars, you still know whether it's day outside or night outside. That's what the first day is speaking about. Second day, firmament. Again, the atmosphere begins to dissipate even more, so much so that the rain cycle starts, that now, for the first time, there's a distinction between the ocean below and the water in the atmosphere above, meaning it's not just like a water-covered surface of the earth with a misty, thick atmosphere, that for the first time, rains start, that there's the sense of water coming from above, raining on the ground, and waters below. There's a distinction made between them. On the third day, we have this uni ocean, which covers the entire earth, finally recede enough or dry up enough. The surface of the earth continues to dry up enough that dry land peaks out, and now the seas, quote unquote, recede. The oceans recede back into a place where they expose dry land. Finally, the atmosphere on the fourth day continues to dry up enough, continues to become thin enough, so that finally, at long last, after who knows how many millions or billions of years after the earth spoken about at the beginning of Genesis in the primordial state. Finally, you can peek through the clouds, and finally you can see the sun, the moon, and the stars. The fourth day does not mean this is the day on which the sun, the moon, and the stars were created, because that would be absolutely nonsensical. It means this is the day on which the sun, the moon, and the stars became visible from the surface of the earth. Everything is from the surface of the earth. The fish and the birds, this is not when they were created. This is when they started to proliferate. It's what it says explicitly. It doesn't say that's when he created them. It says that's when they started to proliferate. That's when they started to multiply abundantly. And we link this back perhaps to the Cambrian explosion. And then finally, more advanced forms of life on the surface of the earth are created on the sixth day, meaning the modern mammals, the modern animals, and then finally the human being. And that's Genesis chapter 1. It takes us from primordial earth 4 billion years ago, again, I'm throwing out a rough number, until the creation of modern human beings on the face of the earth approximately 6,000 years ago. Before that, there may have been some other forms of human beings, but they were not modern human beings like we are. They didn't have the full understanding. They didn't have the full awareness that we as modern human beings have. And we see that certain things happened 5,000, 6,000 years ago for the first time ever in history, maybe the most obvious or the most important one being the beginning of the recording of history, the beginning of writing systems. There were no writing systems before then. Yeah, there were a couple of cave drawings here and there, but before about 6,000 years ago, human beings did not write. They did not have written language. They did not record history. That only started about 6,000 years ago. And that implies that humanity, whatever primordial humanity was beforehand, it was not the same as what humanity became 6,000 years ago, approximately, at the creation of modern man, modern Adam and modern Eve, or modern human beings. And that's the way I see Genesis chapter 1. Okay. Any questions, any comments at this point? Anybody? Okay, I think we're gonna go on for another 10 or 15 minutes, and then we're gonna end. So, chapter 2, maybe I always say I'm gonna go into express mode, but there's always so much to say. So that's probably not gonna happen, but maybe I'll just try to read through and get to, because this is a huge parsha. You know, obviously there's so much to say, but I would like to at least get through. Boy, I don't know how we're gonna do it. Chapters 2, 3, 4, 5. I could try, but I know myself already. I'll start commenting, and that'll be the end of that. But let's try it. We'll try to read through. You can follow along in Hebrew or in your chosen language. Vayechulu hashamayim va'aretz v'chot tziva'am. Verse 2. Vayichal Elohim bayom hashavi'i milachto asher asa. So at the beginning of the seventh day, he had already finished all the work that he did. Vayishbot, and notice that he's doing milacha. He doesn't do milacha. We're not allowed to do milacha on Shabbat. He rests from his milacha, from his tasks, and so do we. Vayishbot biyom hashvi'i kol milachto asher asa. And he rested, or he ceased, at the beginning of the seventh day from all of his work, all of his tasks which he had done. Verse 3, Vayivarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i vayikadesh oto hibo Shabbat mikol milachto asher bara Elohim la'asot. Verse 4, Ele todot hashamayim v'ha'aretz v'hi baram v'yom asot Yahweh Elohim eretz v'shamayim. Verse 5, V'chol siach hasadeh terem יהיה בארץ. וכל עשף השדה טרם יצמח, כי לא המטיר יהוה אלוהים על הארץ. So this is very interesting. I'm again reading English. He's saying that the story is picked up, this is before there were any plants growing on the earth, plants or I guess trees or plants growing on the earth. Because terem yitzmach kilo imtir Yahweh Elohim ala aretz, because God had not yet rained down rain upon the earth. Adam ein lavod et adama, and there were not yet human beings. How amazing that this is so in line with the modern history of our earth, with the fossil record. It's incredible, actually. So if anything, to me, Genesis 1, Genesis 2, it is backed up by science. It's not contradicted by science. Verse 6, Wa'ed ya'aleh mina aretz, wa'ishka et kol pnei adama. So here it says mist came up from the land, and that's what watered all the face of the earth. It's not speaking about rain from the sky. This is before there was rain. There was mist coming up from the earth. So we're talking about a very primordial form of earth. Vayitzer Yahweh Elohim et Adam afar mina adama v'yifach be'apao nishmat hayim vayhi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. Again, so much to say, but I just want to read through a little bit more so we can get kind of through our chapter. Vayita Yahweh Elohim gan ba'eden, the Garden of Eden, Makedem, wa yasem sham et adam asher yasar. This is verse 8, chapter 2, verse 8. Vaytzmach Yahweh Elohim mina adama kol etz nehmad nemar'eh v'tov nema'achal wa'etz ha'chayim b'toch hagan wa'etz hadda'at tov wara. So this is the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Verse 10. Nahar Yosei Ma'edem Lashkot et Hagan Hagan Umisham Yipared Wahaya Le'arba'a Rashim. So a river flew out of Eden, or flowed out of Eden, not flew out of Eden, flowed out of Eden and broke into 4 parts. Shema had Pishon hu hasovev et kol eretz hawila asher sham hazahav. Verse 12, how we learn about the land of Havila or Hawila. Zahav aretz hahi tov sham habedolach wa even hashoham. Verse 13, Ushem hanahar sheni gihon hu asovev et kol eretz kush. Ushem hanahar shlishi hidekel wa holech kidmat ashur wanar wahanar ha-revi'i uprat. It's a very interesting video about these 4 rivers. I wish I could find it. I don't have time to look for it right now. But basically, this person made a very interesting video about how the Garden of Eden was located in what is now the Persian Gulf. And now it's underwater, but back then it was not. And that's where he thinks the Garden of Eden was. And it makes a lot of sense from the description of these 4 rivers. Okay. Verse 15. Waikach Yahweh Elohim et ha'adam Oyani chehu began Eden le'avda u'leshemra. Verse 16. Waisau Yahweh. Now, hold on a second here. No, I think this is it right here. So I just wanted to point out very quickly. Yeah, The first appearance of the name of God, of Yahweh, is not in Genesis 1. It's in Genesis 2, verse 4. This is the first time the name Yahweh appears. These are the, and I'll read that verse again. Ele toldot hashamayim wa'aretz b'hi baram b'yom asot Yahweh Elohim eretz v'shamayim. These are the histories of the sky and the earth when they were created on the day that Yahweh made them, or God, Yahweh, the God Yahweh made them, made the heavens and the earth, or the land and the sky. Okay. So where were we? I think we're in verse 16. Vayisau Yahweh Elohim al ha'adam lemor mikol etz hagan achol tochel. You can eat anything in the garden, he says to Adam, to the human beings. Uma'etz hada'at tov wa ra' lo tochal mimenu ki biyom achlecha mimenu mot tamuth. But do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, of good and bad, because on the day that you eat from it, you will die. Verse 18, Vayomer Yahweh Elohim, lo tov hiot ha'adam levado, ase lo ezer kenegdo. It's not good for the man to be alone. I'll make a helper for him. Verse 19, Vayiser Yahweh Elohim min ha'adama kol hayat השדה ואת כל עוף השמיים ויבא אל האדם לראות מה יקרא לו וכל אשר יקרא לו האדם נפש החיה הוא שמו. So this is where Adam gives names to each of the animals. God brings the animals to Adam and he names them. Verse 20, ויקרא האדם שמות לכל הבהמה ולעוף השמיים ולכל חיית השדה. Uladam lo matza ezer kenegedo, but he didn't find a good helper among all the animals. Thank God, or else I guess we'd all be married to donkeys or I don't know, rats or something like that. Okay. Vayapel Yahweh Elohim tardema al ha'adam vayishan mikach achad mi'salaotav. So God takes a rib out of Adam. ויבן יחווה אלוהים את הצלע אשר לקח מן האדם לאישה ויביאיה אל האדם. So God builds the woman out of the rib and brings her to Adam. Verse 23, ויאמר האדם זאת הפעם עצם מעצמי ובשר מבשרי לזאת יקרא אישה, כי מאיש לוקחה זאת. She's called Isha, woman, because she's taken from man. Woman, man. Even in English, that holds to this day, except for the feminists that wanted to change the spelling of woman to W-O-M-Y-N, because they don't like the idea that she was taken from man. What is the forbidden fruit? Is it really fruit or behavior? Boy, that's a long topic that I don't think I can answer in 2 seconds. We'd really have to dig into the story. You know, we could take the story two ways. We could take it as an allegory, or we could take it as real events. It can go either way. My gut feeling is, you know, I'm a believer in Torah, so I tend to take it more literally, but I could accept those who see this as an allegory. Okay, but we don't have time now to go into it, unfortunately. Al ken ya'azov ish et aviu wa et imo wa davak ba'ishto wa hayu bevasar ehad. Verse 25. ויהיו שניהם ערומים האדם ואשתו ולא יתבוששו. That's the end of chapter 3 of chapter 2. And I guess we'll go through chapter 3 and then I'm going to end it. Play on words here, but we don't have time to get into it. وَهَنَخَاشْ haya arum mikol hayat asadeh. So here's the snake. Asher asa Yahweh Elohim. Vayomer el ha'isha ki amar Elohim. Lo tuchlu mikol etz hagan. So this is the innocence, and innocence leads to stupidity from lack of life experience. So Adam and Eve were easily tricked. It's kind of almost not their fault. They were, they didn't have life experience. They just thought in a simplistic kind of way. And I guess our whole existence on this earth is that as a species, as the human race, we build up life experience, and that eventually finds its fruition in the end of days. Verse 2, Watomer ha'isha el hanachash yupri etz hagan tochel. So this is the snake. I'm sorry, this is Eve speaking to the snake. ומפרי העץ אשר בתוך הגן אמר אלוהים לא תאכלו ממנו ולא תיגעו בו פן תמותון. Verse 4. ויאמר הנחש אל האישה לא מות תמותון. So this is the snake using some very sneaky arguments to trick the relatively innocent, inexperienced, and childlike Adam and Eve. Almost like taking candy from a baby, or more like giving candy to a baby. Ki yodea Elohim ki bayom acholchem mimenu wanifkechu anechem wa'item ki Elohim yodea tov wara. So much to say. My God, I wish we had another 3 hours to talk about this, but we don't. Verse 6, so in chapter 3, verse 6, وَتَرَي هَإِشَا كِتَوْب هَإِس لِمَأَخَلْ وَخِي تَعْوَهُ لَعِنَيْم وَنِحْمَدْ هَإِس لَحَسْكِيل وَتِكَخْ مِپِرِيو وَتُخَل وَتِتَين גَم لَإِشَا قِيمَة وَيُخَل. So that's where Adam and Eve eat from the tree. Verse 7, wa tif akhuno aine shnehem wa yed'u ki erumim hem wa yithbiru ale te'ema wa yasu lahem hagorot. So this is where they cover themselves with fig leaves. They make like a loincloth out of fig leaves. Verse 8, wa yishma'u et kol Yahweh Elohim mitalech בגן לרוח היום ויתחבא האדם ואשתו לפני יהוה אלוהים בתוך עץ הגן. So now they're hiding from God. Verse 9, ויקרא יהוה אלוהים אל האדם ויאמר לו אייך. So God calls out to Adam, asks, where are you? ויאמר את כולך שמעתי בגן ויראה כי עירום אנוכי ואחבא. So God says, well, I got scared because I heard you calling out, but I got scared because I'm naked. But that was the giveaway. Now God calls him out on that. ויאמר מי הגיד לך כי עירום אתה? Who said? Who told you that you're naked? המין העץ אשר ציוויתיך לבלתי אכול ממנו אכלת? How did you know you were naked? Did you eat from that tree of knowledge and good and evil that I told you not to eat from? Verse 12. ויאמר האדם, האישה אשר נתת היא מעדי היא נתנה לי מן העץ ואוכל. So it took about 2 seconds for Adam to throw Eve under the bus. Verse 13, ויאמר יהוה אלוהים לאישה, מה זאת עשית? ותאמר האישה, nahash He shi'ani wa ochel. So now it takes. Now Eve throws the snake under the bus, which would have been a good idea for her to do beforehand, literally. Verse 14, Wayomer Yahweh Elohim El Hanachash. So now Adam threw Eve under the bus. Eve threw the snake under the bus. So now God brings his curses and he works his way up from the snake back up to Edom, back up to Eve, back up to Adam in reverse order. Wayomer Yahweh Elohim El Nahash. Ki asita zot arur ata mikol habehema mikol hayat asadeh al gahuntka. Punishment for the snake. Eva sheep bintcha uben haisha uben zaracha uben zar'a hu yishufcha rosh wa'ata tishufenu akev. Punishment for the snake. Verse 16. I think we're just going to go to the end of this chapter, and then that'll be it for today. Ela isha amar arbe itz vonech wahe ronech wa'etzev teldi banim wa'el ishech tishukatech wahu imshal bach. Anti-feminist statement. ולאדם אמר כי שמעת לכל אשתך תאכל מן העץ אשר ציוויתיך לאמור לא תאכל ממנו ארורה האדמה בעבורך בעיצבון תאכלנה כל ימי חייך. So both have this word עיצבון, עיצבונך and itzavon, meaning in sorrow, I guess, how they translate it here, in toil. So toil is placed as a curse upon both the woman and the man, the woman in childbirth and the man in going out and providing for his family. The two main purposes of each of these types of, or each of these sexes of creatures, of human beings. The main purpose of the woman on planet Earth is to give birth. The main purpose of the man is to provide for his family and protect his family. And now both are given this curse of itzavon, of toil, or we'll go toil, sorrow, they translate it here as sorrow or toil in their main tasks in life. Right? God knows exactly how to get to them. וקוץ ודרדר תצמיח לך ואכלת את עשב השדה. בזיעת אפיך תאכל לחם עד שובך אל האדמה כי ממנו לקחת כי עפר אתה ואל עפר תשוב. From dust did you come, and to dust shall you return. This is God saying that you will not live forever. ויקרא אדם שם אשתו חווה, חווה, כי היא הייתה אם כל חי. So Eve is called Hawa. That's translated into English as Eve or Hawa, because ki em kol chai, she's the mother of everything living. So the word Hawa is taken from the word Hai, which means the mother of all living things, meaning all human beings. So Hawa means, I guess, mother of life. You can translate it as. We'll just go to the end of this chapter and then we're going to finish. ויעץ יהוה אלוהים לאדם ולאשתו כתונות אור וילבישם. He made skins, he made garments of skin, of animal skins. First time we see, right after the curse, that animals are being used as products for human beings. Verse 22. ויאמר יהוה אלוהים הן האדם היה כאחד ממנו לדעת טוב ורע, ועתה פן ישלח ידו, ולקח גם עץ החיים, ואכל וחי לעולם. So now God says, he's already knows the difference between good and evil, and now we have to prevent him from eating of the tree of life, because then he'll live forever. Verse 23, וישלחהו יהוה אלוהים מגן עדן לעבוד את האדמה אשר לקח משם, and they get thrown out of the Garden of Eden. That's where God says he's going to do it. And in verse 24, ויגרש את אדם וישכן מקדם לגן עדן, and he threw out Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, and they settled to the east of the Garden of Eden. את קרובים ואת להט החרב המתהפכת לשמור את דרך עץ החיים. And he sets kruvim, cherubim, with a rotating flaming sword to guard the tree of life. It's interesting that kruvim are the same things that are on the ark cover, and between the kruvim, it's where God's glory lives on the ark cover much later. Is that a coincidence? I don't know. And that's the end of Genesis 3, and I think we're going to end the study here for today. So I guess I will ask finally if there are any other questions or comments, but actually it's kind of getting late, so I think we're going to actually skip questions and comments. I'm going to end it for today. I thank you all for joining me. Let's all spend this week praying for the people of Israel, praying for everyone that is going through this horrible stuff that's going on in Israel right now. All of us who are here, we love the people of Israel. We're shocked, of course, by what happened in Israel, and it's very sad. And sadly, very, very sadly, this is the consequence of what happens to our people when we don't follow the Torah, and instead when we adopt these two false philosophies of Western morality and rabbinical Judaism. This is sadly, very sadly, the consequence. Hopefully, it will be a wake-up call. It already is to some people in Israel, but I don't know if it's yet going to reach a critical mass. So we can only hope and pray that it does. And please, one second. Sorry, distractions. So at any rate, so let's hope that out of this horrible thing that happened in Israel, it serves some kind of wake-up call. You know, every tragedy sadly leads to the next stage. You know, is the next stage going to be a good stage or going to be a bad stage? Unfortunately, it seems like things are going to get worse before they get better. Maybe a lot worse before they get better. But eventually they will get better. And we as Karaites, as Karaite leaning, we as Tanach leaning, the most we can do is try to spread the word, try to spread the name of Yahweh among the people of Israel, tell them to call out to him, tell them to pray for him, tell them to cling not to rabbinical Judaism, not to Western culture, but to the true Torah, to the true Tanakh. And I think that's one of the main things that we can do for the people of Israel at this time. Yes, it's also the consequence of incompetence, but where does this incompetence come from? Yardain is the question. Remember, these leaders were elected by the people, and they're elected by the people because they were blind. And now more people have started to wake up. But unfortunately, I'm sorry to say this, but I think things are going to get worse, maybe even far worse before they get better. But let's pray that our people can learn the lesson the easy way rather than the hard way, and that it doesn't get far worse before it gets better. Anyway, that's my prayer. Cling to Yahweh, cling to his Torah, and cling to his people, pray for his people. And that's, I won't say it's the only thing we can do, but it's one of the best things we can do at this point in time. So with that being said, I'll wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov, wherever you are on the face of the earth. And Be'ezrat Yahweh, we will see you again next week. We'll go out with music as usual.
השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי. עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. אוי 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 אוי, שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי. עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. אוי 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 אוי, שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי. עזרי מעם השם. מקימי מעפר מהשפות ירים אביון להושיבי עם נדיבים, עם נדיבי עמו. מי כהשם אלוקינו, המגביל לשבת, המשפילי לראות בשמיים ובארץ. אוי מקימי מעפר דל, מאשפות ירים אביון. אוי להושיבי עם נדיבים, עם נדיבי עמו. נאי נאי נא נאי נא נאי נא נא נאי נאי נא נאי נא נא נאי 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 נא נאי נאי נאי. אוי אוי נא נאי נא נא נאי נא נא נאי נאי נא נאי. אוי נא נא נאי נא נאי. מי כהשם אלוקינו, המגביל לשבת, המשפילי לראות. אוי בשמיים ובארץ. אוי מקימי מעפר דל, מאשפות ירים אביון. אוי להושיבי עם נדיבים, עם נדיבי עמו. נאי נאי נא נאי נא נא נאי נא נא נאי נאי נא נאי נא נא נאי נא נא נאי נא